Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. We were camped out near Comb Ridge, southern Utah. Not a campsite exactly, just a flat stretch of sandstone off a dirt road we'd followed too far. It was one of those last-minute plans. Jenna knew a spot, Trent brought firewood, I had the tent, and Dana packed enough food to feed a search party. We'd hiked during the day, got sunburned, then cracked beers and watched the cliffs turn pink in the evening. You know how it is. The four of us had set up on this little plateau that overlooked the valley to the west. You could see for miles, just mesas and dry scrub with maybe one road far in the distance. No towns nearby, no houses. Once the sun dipped, it got real quiet. Still hot, but no wind. You could hear the buzzing in your ears. We stayed up late, past midnight. No one had cell service, so we just sat around the fire telling dumb stories. At one point, Dana tried to get a game going, some improv thing she learned in her acting class, but everyone was too tired or too drunk to care. Eventually, the fire died down and we just laid back on our sleeping pads, watching the stars. They were everywhere. Probably the clearest sky I've ever seen. I remember Jenna pointing out how weird it was that the stars seemed closer out there. Not brighter, just somehow nearer, like you could touch them if you stood on your toes long enough. Trent started talking about satellites and how they move in a straight line, real slow. I was half listening. We'd been naming constellations wrong on purpose and laughing too hard at our own jokes. Then Dana said, "That one's moving fast." We all looked where she was pointing, a spot just above the northern rim of the plateau. At first it looked like a regular star, maybe a little brighter than the rest, but it was definitely getting lower. It wasn't arcing like a meteor, and it wasn't flickering or flaring out, just dropping, straight down, slow and smooth. Jenna asked, "Is that a drone?" But we knew it wasn't. Too high and totally silent. No blinking lights, no shape we could make out, just that bright white dot falling through the sky. We sat up, watching it. Trent even stood, like that would help. The thing dropped maybe a third of the way down the horizon, then stopped. Just stopped midair. I don't mean it slowed down. I mean it froze, like someone paused a video. It hovered there above the cliffs, completely still, way too still. No sway, no movement, just hanging. We didn't talk for a bit. The fire had burned out completely by then. It felt colder all of a sudden. I remember that. Not like the temperature dropped, but more like the air felt thin. Harder to breathe. Dana said, "Is anyone else hearing that?" I hadn't noticed it until she said something, a low humming like bass through a wall. You couldn't hear it exactly, but you could feel it in your chest. Real faint, almost like your own heartbeat, except off somehow. Like it was coming from the wrong direction. The light didn't move. We watched it for maybe a full minute, just sitting there in the sky, not wavering, not flickering. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. It didn't look mechanical, but it didn't look natural either. It was just wrong. And then it faded. Not dimmed, not blinked out, faded. Like someone was slowly turning down a dimmer switch. It didn't shrink or fly off. It just disappeared, right there in place. 1 second it was a solid white point, the next it was gone. We waited, I don't know how long, nobody said anything for a while. Trent finally broke the silence by asking if we should maybe go, but go where? It was almost 2 in the morning and we were miles from the main road. We didn't see anything else that night, but none of us really slept either. We stayed zipped in the tent, lying still, listening. That weird hum was gone, but the quiet didn't feel normal after that. It felt heavy. Around dawn, when the light started coming in over the ridge, I noticed something weird about our setup. All 4 of our sleeping pads had been dragged about a foot east. Not blown, not shifted. Dragged. You could see the scrape marks in the dust. Our packs were untouched. Nothing was missing. Just the pads. I pointed it out to the others, but nobody had a good answer. Dana said it was probably the wind, but there hadn't been any wind. Not even a breeze. Plus, the fire ring was still perfectly intact. Jenna checked her phone once we got close to service. No alerts, no seismic activity, nothing about test flights or weather balloons. We talked about it a few times after we got home, usually late at night when someone had a drink in their hand, but it always ended the same way. Just us, sitting there, not knowing what to say. We all saw it. We all remember it the same way. That star that dropped hovered and disappeared like it was never there. None of us ever camped on that ridge again. I was driving home from my sister's place in Laramie, headed back to Rawlins. It was just after 9, mid-March, and already pitch black out. Wyoming nights feel emptier than anywhere else I've ever lived. There's just this wide, open silence that gets into your head after a while. I remember thinking I should have left earlier, but we lost track of time playing cards and talking about her kids. The drive from Laramie to Rawlins isn't complicated. Just get on I-80 and head west. Long, flat stretches broken up by patches of nothing. Not a lot of streetlights once you're out of town. I had my usual setup going, coffee in the cup holder, podcast playing low, my old mutt Frankie asleep in the back seat. She's a boxer mix, mostly muscle and attitude, but road trips knock her right out. Anyway, I was about 30 minutes out, maybe halfway between Arlington and Elk Mountain. There's a stretch there with no exits, just sagebrush and those old wooden snow fences they put up along the highway. I remember glancing at the dash, it said 9:42, and then noticing something off with the light ahead of me. It wasn't headlights, more like a soft white glow coming from somewhere above the road. At first, I thought it might be a plane banking low. There's an airfield way off in Medicine Bow, I think. But then I realized it wasn't moving like a plane. It wasn't flashing or changing direction. It was just gliding. I slowed down, dropped to maybe 50, and leaned forward to see through the windshield better. The thing was massive, black, and almost impossible to see against the night sky unless it passed in front of a star. Triangle-shaped with rounded edges. No visible lights on it, but somehow the area underneath was just a little bit brighter, like ambient glow or maybe reflection. It made no sound. That's what threw me. There wasn't even wind. It moved straight overhead, maybe 100 feet above the highway. Could have been lower, hard to say in the dark. I rolled my window down halfway and stuck my head out, trying to hear something. But it was dead silent. No hum, no whoosh, not even engine noise from my own car since I dropped down so slow. I watched it pass over the hood of my Subaru and drift off toward the south. Took maybe 15 seconds total, and then it was gone. No acceleration, no blinking lights, just gone. The second it was out of sight, Frankie sat up and started whining. She doesn't usually wake up for anything less than food, but she stood there in the back seat, ears low, and looked around like she was trying to find something. I pulled over onto the shoulder, put the flashers on, and just sat there. My hands were shaking, not out of fear, exactly, more like confusion. I kept trying to think of what kind of aircraft could be that quiet. Maybe a military drone, but it was too big and it didn't have any kind of propulsion I could see or hear. That's when I remembered the dash cam. I'd bought it after getting rear-ended by a semi last winter, just one of those cheap front-facing ones that auto-record when you start the car. It runs on a loop and stores the last few hours unless you manually save a clip. I figured if I had something weird on there, I better save it before it got overwritten. I sat there on the shoulder, engine idling, while I fiddled with the screen. It's small, like 2 inches wide, and not meant for reviewing footage, but I managed to scroll back to the right time window. I watched it play through, the moment where I slowed down, looked up, and then nothing. Just darkness. The road, the faint glow from my headlights, and then black sky. No object. No triangle. Not even the stars I remember seeing behind it. Just a void. I played it again, slower. Same thing. The trees, the snow fence, the dash lights reflecting faintly on the windshield, but the sky was blank. Not cloudy, not grainy, just a clean, dark screen like someone edited it out. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes trying to figure it out. Tried recording a fresh clip, pointing the camera up out the windshield, and that worked fine. Stars were visible, the glare from the moon showed up, even passing trucks lit the screen up. So it wasn't the camera. It caught everything except that triangle. That part still bugs me. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. Frankie wouldn't lay down again. She just sat there in the back, watching the rear window like something might come up behind us. When I got to my driveway, I backed in and sat for a minute before cutting the engine. Everything felt quiet again, too quiet. I went inside, fed Frankie, and then pulled the SD card from the dash cam to check it on my laptop. I found the clip, full HD, timestamped 9:42 p.m. It showed me slowing down, leaning forward, and rolling the window down. You can hear the wind pick up, but the sky's just blank. No object, no motion, not even the faint glow I saw passing overhead. It looks like I'm reacting to nothing. I checked the other files on the card just to be sure. Earlier clips showed the drive out, my sister's neighborhood, even a coyote crossing the road around mile marker 267. All clear. But that one clip is the only one with the weird missing sky. Almost like something scrubbed the image before it hit the card. I thought about posting the video online, but there's nothing to see, really. Just me acting strange and a missing patch of sky. Doesn't prove anything. A few days later, I drove the same route during the day, trying to match landmarks. I wanted to find the exact spot where it happened. I pulled off at a rest area near Elk Mountain and checked the mile markers, thinking maybe something physical would jog my memory. But I couldn't find the exact place. The fences all look the same, the brush, the road, it's all just a repeating loop of the same landscape. That section of highway hasn't felt the same since. I still drive it sometimes, but only during the day. Frankie gets restless around Arlington now, starts shifting in her seat and pacing until we're well past it. Sometimes I wonder if other people saw something that night, but I didn't hear anything on the news. I even checked a few local forums, but nothing came up. No power outages, no sightings, no plane reports. Just a black triangle over the highway that didn't leave a trace behind. Not even on the camera. The clip's still saved on my hard drive. Every now and then I open it just to make sure it's still the same. It always is. I was hiking in the Ouachita Mountains in Arkansas. This was early November, right after the first cold snap of the year, so the trails were pretty empty. I'd taken a few days off work to get away from everything and try to clear my head. My plan was simple, 2 nights out, solo, nothing too remote, but far enough off the beaten path that I wouldn't be running into families or big groups. I brought my dog, Jasper, a wiry little mutt I picked up from a shelter a few years back. He's quiet, good off-leash, and usually more alert than I am. We parked at the trailhead just after lunch and set off. The sky was cloudy and the air felt damp, like it might rain later, but it held off most of the day. Just that dull, heavy kind of overcast that makes the woods feel closer than they are. By late afternoon, I'd made it about 5 miles in to a spot I'd camped once before, a flat patch above a creek, surrounded by thick pines and a few younger oaks. I set up camp, got a small fire going, and heated up some canned chili while Jasper nosed around in the brush. Nothing strange happened that first night. It got colder than I expected, enough that I woke up a couple times and had to burrow deeper into my sleeping bag. I heard coyotes around midnight, but that's pretty normal out there. The next day was uneventful too. We hiked another few miles to a small ridge where I stopped to eat lunch and watch the tree line. The clouds had thinned out a bit, but it still never really brightened up. Around 3, I decided to start heading back toward the first site. I'd planned to camp there again, just to keep things simple. We were maybe a mile out from the site, picking our way down a narrow trail when Jasper stopped cold. He didn't growl or bark, just stood there, rigid, ears forward. I crouched next to him and listened. At first, I didn't hear anything, just the usual forest sounds, a few birds, the rustling of dry leaves. Then I heard it, this low humming noise, not loud, but steady. I thought it might be a plane at first, except it didn't fade in or out like they usually do. It was constant, a mechanical sort of hum like an old generator running behind a wall. I looked up expecting to see a plane or maybe even a drone, but there was nothing, just clouds and trees. That's when I noticed the trees were moving. Not all of them, just the ones directly above us. They were swaying in a circle. Not violently, but steady, like they were caught in a slow spin, each one bending just slightly at the top, enough to make the motion clear. There wasn't any wind. The air around me was dead still. I even licked my finger and held it up, trying to feel something. Nothing. The lower branches and the undergrowth weren't moving at all. Jasper started whining softly, tail tucked low. I tried to get a video on my phone, but when I opened the camera app, the hum stopped. Just cut off mid-note. The trees stilled like someone hit pause. I kept staring up, phone still in my hand, waiting for something else to happen, but that was it. Everything went back to normal. We kept moving. I told myself it was some weird, localized wind I couldn't feel. Maybe an updraft, something with air pressure. I don't know. But the feeling I had, like we weren't supposed to be standing there, didn't go away. We made it back to the camp spot around sunset. I didn't build a fire that night. I just ate a protein bar and sat inside the tent with Jasper curled up beside me. He kept his nose to the zipper flap for an hour straight, ears twitching at every tiny sound. I fell asleep eventually, but it wasn't restful. I kept waking up thinking I heard the hum again, but each time it was just in my head. Around 3 a.m., Jasper started growling low in his throat, not barking, just a deep, steady growl. I sat up and unzipped the flap an inch to look out. There was a faint light moving through the trees, a dull blue-white glow, maybe the size of a basketball, floating about 6 feet off the ground. It passed between the trees slowly, like someone holding a lantern and walking without a sound. It didn't cast shadows, that's what stuck out to me. The light hit the trunks, but nothing changed. No contrast, no hard edges. It was like the brightness was just sitting on top of everything, not interacting with it. I didn't move. Neither did Jasper. The light passed by about 30 yards from the tent and kept going until it disappeared behind a ridge. I didn't sleep after that. Just sat there with my hand on Jasper's back, both of us waiting. At first light, I packed everything up and started hiking out. I skipped breakfast, didn't even boil water, just wanted to get moving. The forest looked normal. Birds were singing again, squirrels darted across the trail. Everything acted like nothing had happened. But about a mile from the trailhead, I heard the hum again. This time it was fainter, not directly above, but off to the right, maybe behind a hill or in a hollow. I didn't stop walking, I just kept my head down and pushed through until I saw my car. As we crossed into the gravel lot, the sound cut out again. Not like it faded, but like someone unplugged it. I loaded Jasper into the back seat and got in, started the engine, and didn't look back. I didn't stop until I hit the main road 20 minutes later. Nothing followed us. Nothing appeared in the rear view. I kept checking though, all the way home. I didn't tell anyone about it for a while. Not because I thought they'd think I was crazy, but because I didn't really know how to describe it. I've spent enough time outdoors to know what's normal and what's not. That wasn't normal. And it wasn't just one thing, it was the combination, the hum, the trees, the light that didn't cast shadows. Jasper still won't go near the tent. I tried setting it up in the yard a few weeks later just to air it out, and he wouldn't go near it. Just sat on the porch and stared like something was inside it. I haven't been back to the Ouachitas since. I still hike, different trails, closer to town. Usually with friends now, but every time I step into the woods, even just for an hour, I catch myself scanning the sky without meaning to, just looking for movement. So far, I haven't seen the trees move like that again, but I know what I saw. I'd just gotten back into jogging after taking a few months off for a sprained ankle. Nothing dramatic. Stepped off a curb, weird, walking my neighbor's dog, of all things. But that night, my third run back, I was finally starting to hit my rhythm again. It was a little past 9 p.m. in late August. Still hot, but not unbearable. The kind of sticky Missouri heat where the air feels heavy, but it cools just enough once the sun's been down a while. I ran the trail that loops around Millwood Park. It's a small one, nothing special. One paved path, some scattered benches, a duck pond, and a few swing sets with that faded blue rubber flooring. It backs up against a residential neighborhood on one side and a small stretch of woods on the other. Pretty quiet most of the time. I like running that loop after dark because no one's ever really there. Just a couple dog walkers sometimes, maybe some teenager vaping behind the gazebo. That night, I didn't even see that. I had my earbuds in at first, but I took them out after the first lap. Not sure why. Something about the stillness made me feel weird about not being able to hear what was going on around me. It wasn't like anything felt wrong, exactly. Just off. There were these little things I started noticing as I rounded the bend near the tennis courts. First, I realized I hadn't seen a single car on the roads that bordered the park. Usually, you'll catch headlights going by every couple minutes. Parents picking up their kids from practice, people driving home from late shifts, but the road was just empty. Then there was this weird rhythm to the sounds around me. The bugs were still going, cicadas, crickets, whatever else, but they were all in sync. Not just loud, synchronized. It was like someone had looped an audio track of summer night noises and was playing it through a giant invisible speaker. No variation, no layers, just the same rise and fall over and over. I slowed down a little and glanced around. The park looked normal. Everything was lit by those tall orange street lamps they've got spaced out along the trail. I passed the metal trash can near the basketball court and noticed it was full, but not overflowing. The water fountain was dripping, all totally ordinary stuff. But the more I looked, the less natural it all felt. The way the shadows stretched, how nothing seemed to move unless I moved. I don't know how to describe it better than that. I was just finishing my second lap when it started happening. I just passed the duck pond again and was heading toward the cluster of 3 streetlights near the playground when the first one flickered. Just a little at first, like a bulb going bad, but then the next one flickered too. Then the third. They were perfectly spaced, like 30 feet apart, and all 3 started flickering in sync. Buzzing, dimming, brightening. Buzzing again, then dim, then nothing. Then back on, then off again. I stopped running, pulled out my phone and checked the time, 9:13 p.m. I stood there and watched, trying to figure out if maybe the power grid was acting up. We'd had a thunderstorm 2 nights earlier, maybe something got fried. But that didn't explain the timing or the weird deliberate rhythm, because that's what it felt like. Deliberate. After maybe 20 seconds of flickering, they all went dead. Not just off, dead. No buzzing, no glow, just black poles in the dark. And then everything else went quiet too. Instantly. No bugs, no leaves rustling, no distant cars, total silence, like someone vacuumed the air out of the park. That's when I noticed the light. It was small, bright, pure white, hanging maybe 30 or 40 feet above the treetops on the wooded side of the park, maybe 100 yards away. It didn't blink, didn't move, just hovered. And it didn't cast shadows either. That's what struck me first. Even though it was bright, like painful to look at directly, it didn't light up the trees beneath it. They just sat there, black against the darker sky, like the light wasn't reaching them at all. I stood still, didn't move. I wasn't breathing right. I remember holding my arms in close like I was trying to make myself smaller. The light stayed there for maybe 30 seconds. Could have been more. It's hard to gauge time when your brain's screaming that something isn't right, but nothing's happening. Then it moved. Not fast, not slow, just a smooth glide, completely horizontal, directly across the top of the trees. It didn't bob or dip or change size, just this steady line, like it was tracking along a rail. It passed behind one of the bigger oaks and disappeared, and I waited for it to come out the other side, counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, nothing. I stepped forward, trying to get a better angle. My foot crunched on gravel, the only sound I'd heard in what felt like forever. It echoed too loud, like it didn't belong. Still no light. And then, from behind me, the flicker came back. I turned around and saw all 3 streetlights flashing again, but now they were out of sync. Not random, just wrong. One would flash twice, another would buzz, then all 3 would go dark again. And in that moment, I got the overwhelming sense that something was trying to mimic how lights behave, but it didn't quite know how, like it had watched from far away and was guessing. I started walking, fast, toward the trail exit near the rec center. The path curved and I had to pass close to the woods again. I kept expecting to see the light again, hovering just above the trees, but it was gone. Everything was back to normal by the time I got to the sidewalk. The bugs were going again. Faint traffic noises off in the distance. The streetlights outside the park looked fine. I jogged the rest of the way home. Didn't talk to anyone that night. Didn't tell my sister when she called the next day. I didn't even go for another run for 2 weeks. But here's the part that stuck with me most. The next morning, around 6 a.m., I took my dog Olive, a little scruffy mutt with bad knees, out for her usual walk. We stay close to home, just down the sidewalk and around the block. As we passed the corner by the park's north entrance, she stopped and stared toward the trees. Not sniffing, not curious, just staring, totally still. I waited, tugged a little on her leash. She didn't move. Then from somewhere deep in the trees, I heard a short, high-pitched click. Not loud, not natural either, like a hard metal tap. Olive turned and walked back the way we came without me needing to pull. I didn't argue. That was almost 6 months ago. I still run at night sometimes, but never at that park. It was around 3:40 in the morning when I first woke up. I remember because I looked at the clock on the stove after I got a drink of water. I wasn't supposed to be up. My back had been acting up again, and I'd finally managed to get a few hours of sleep. But something, I don't know, a sound maybe, pulled me out of it. I didn't hear anything specific when I sat up. House was quiet. My wife Lorna was still asleep. The dog Cedar hadn't made a peep. But I had that feeling, like when you think someone's standing in the doorway even though the room's empty. Not fear, not at first, just that low-level awareness, like something was off. I figured maybe one of the cows had bumped the fence again. We'd had a couple storms that week, and the wire along the east pasture was sagging. So I got dressed, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped outside. It was colder than I expected. Not freezing, but more than it should have been for early May. No wind, no bugs. That was the first thing that hit me, the quiet. No frogs, no night birds, just the gravel under my boots and the creak of the screen door behind me. Cedar didn't follow me out. He usually does, even at night. He's an old cattle dog, mostly blind now, but he still perks up when I move around. That night he stayed curled up by the stove. I didn't notice that part until later. I headed down the slope behind the barn with the flashlight sweeping ahead. The beam wasn't reaching as far as it normally does, probably the fog. It wasn't thick, but it was clinging low, real patchy, especially around the tree line near the northern fence. Everything felt flat, like there was no depth to anything past the first 50 feet. That's when I saw them. All 16 of the cows, bunched up in the far northwest corner of the pasture, squeezed together like a pack of wet sheep. They weren't making a sound, no lowing, no shifting hooves, just standing there, pressed shoulder to shoulder, facing the same direction. I remember calling out just a short whistle and a "hey there," expecting at least one to flick an ear or turn. Nothing. Every single one of them was staring straight up. Now, my cattle aren't skittish. They get spooked sometimes, sure, but they're used to coyotes and thunderstorms. They don't group up like that unless something's really got to them, and I mean, really. Even then, they don't go quiet. But they were dead still, eyes wide, breathing hard. I could see their sides moving fast in the beam of my flashlight. I looked up, too. Just reflex, I guess. Nothing there. Not a cloud, not a bird, not a sound. Just open sky and stars. Clear as you like. I scanned the fence line next. Thought maybe something had gotten in, a dog, or maybe a catamount, though we haven't seen one of those in years. The wire was intact, no paw prints in the dirt. Nothing disturbed. I started walking toward them, slow, not wanting to set off a stampede. I've never seen cattle act like that before, and I've been doing this since I was 20. You could feel the tension coming off them, like they were about to snap and bolt, but they didn't. They stayed locked in that huddle, staring skyward. Halfway across the field, I turned my flashlight off. I don't even know why. Maybe I thought I'd see something better without it. The dark out there isn't like town dark. It's complete, but that night everything had this weird pale tint. The sky was bright enough from starlight, and the field looked washed out, dim and flat. I looked up again, same stars, same nothing. But then, and I can't explain this part, I got this pressure in my chest. Not pain exactly, more like a weight, like something was leaning down from above. I crouched without meaning to. My knees just buckled a little. The air felt thicker, not warmer, not colder, just heavier. I thought I was having some kind of episode. I actually slapped my own leg to test if I was awake. And I was. I was. The cows hadn't moved. They were still locked onto the same spot, dead still, eyes wide. One of them, Merle, Big Red Angus, always the slowest to spook, had foam around his mouth. His legs were shaking. He looked like he was about to collapse. And then, just like that, the weight lifted. Not gradually. Gone. Like flicking off a switch. The air felt normal again. My ears popped like I'd come down from altitude. The cows turned all at once. Not bolting. Not panicking. They just turned away from the sky, one after another, like someone had called them from behind. They started drifting apart, walking slow, like whatever had them was just gone. I didn't sleep after that. I just sat out on the porch with Cedar, who'd finally come over to press against my leg like he used to when he was young. He kept staring toward the pasture, even after sunrise. Later that morning, I went back out and checked the grass where they'd been grouped up. Ground was dry. No burn marks, no circles, no impressions, just slightly flattened where they'd stood, which made sense. I called the vet to come check them that afternoon. Nothing wrong. No signs of disease, no stress markers, but they didn't eat much for a day or two. Just wandered. Real quiet. I've had weird stuff happen out here before. Lights on the horizon, distant humming, that kind of thing. Always figured it was just weather. Maybe something military. Dugway's not that far, and they test all kinds of stuff out there. But this was different. The way those cows looked, the way it felt in my chest, the way Cedar wouldn't come outside until it was over. I haven't talked to anyone about it besides Lorna, and she thinks I just dreamed it. Says I was probably sleepwalking again, like I used to in my 30s. But I wasn't. I know I wasn't. The cows don't go near that corner anymore. They avoid it like it's fenced off. Nothing grows differently there. No dead patches, but they won't cross into it. Not even when I put feet out. Last week, I caught Cedar standing at the window at 3:30 a.m., staring out across the yard. He doesn't see well anymore, but he stood there stiff as a board, just looking. When I walked over, he growled. This low, unfamiliar rumble I hadn't heard from him in years. I looked out too. Sky was clear, full of stars, nothing moving, nothing there. I work as a surveyor for a company that does environmental assessments, mostly for utility projects and some land development. Usually it's groundwork, but sometimes they send me up in a helicopter to get aerial footage when they're mapping out large tracts of forest or difficult terrain. I'm not a pilot or anything, just a guy who knows how to operate drones and cameras and ride along with the pilot. Last summer, I was out in northern Vermont, somewhere near the border with New Hampshire, flying over this dense patch of forest that covered hundreds of acres. The pilot, a guy named Jared, was a calm, steady type, used to flying low and slow so I could get clear shots. The day was mostly clear, but there was a slight haze, like the kind of humidity that feels thick but invisible. The sun was starting to dip low in the sky, making the whole forest look like a giant shadowy green blanket. We were on a routine flight, the Fred. I had my handheld camera and a drone with me, recording the canopy and the tree lines, trying to spot any signs of logging activity or clear cuts. I was scanning the live feed from the drone, flying it a little ahead of the helicopter to get tighter shots of certain areas Jared called out. After maybe 45 minutes of this, I noticed something weird on the drone feed. There was this perfectly circular clearing in the middle of the thick forest. It was maybe 100 feet across, maybe a little more, and the trees around it formed a perfect ring. What caught my attention was that the ground inside was bare dirt, no grass or underbrush, almost like someone had scooped it out and left it clean. The circle was sharp-edged, as if drawn by a compass. No fallen trees, no machinery tracks, nothing. Just an empty ring. I asked Jared to circle back so I could get a closer look. We came around slowly and I focused the drone over the clearing, zooming in for detail. The dirt looked oddly smooth, no signs of erosion, tire tracks, or animal paths going in or out. I even spotted some faint patterns on the dirt. Faint, like someone had lightly raked it, or maybe it was natural erosion. I wasn't sure. The weird part was that I'd checked all the maps we had on the tablet, satellite images, topo maps, everything, and this clearing wasn't on any of them. No record. We looked it up later when we got back to the office, zooming in on the GPS coordinates, but nothing showed up. The trees were supposed to be uninterrupted there for miles. Jared joked that maybe it was some kind of secret helicopter landing zone or a hunting camp, but the clearing was too perfect and too clean for that. No fire rings, no wood piles, no tire tracks, nothing that suggested people had been there. The ground was bare, but it didn't look disturbed in any typical way. I flew the drone lower to try to see if there were any markings or footprints. I zoomed in on the dirt, but the resolution wasn't great from that height, and there were no obvious footprints or other signs. I thought I might try to get down there myself for a better look, but the forest was dense and the clearing was in the middle of a patch with no trails or roads nearby. Back on the helicopter, I kept the camera rolling, trying to catch any change in light or movement. The sun was slipping behind the trees now, and the shadows inside the circle grew long and deep. I thought maybe I'd see animals or birds, but nothing moved inside that clearing. No birds flying overhead, no squirrels darting through. It was just still. Something else caught my eye on the drone feed. Around the edges of the clearing, the trees didn't look quite normal. They were tall and straight, but the bark on them looked oddly smooth and almost reflective, like a thin layer of gloss had settled over them. I squinted at the screen, thinking it was a camera glitch or maybe the sun hitting them just right, but the effect stayed consistent as the drone circled. We kept watching for a while. Then the drone started to glitch. The video feed cut in and out for a few seconds, static crackling through the speaker. Jared said the helicopter might be interfering with the signal, but the glitches got worse every time I focused on the clearing. Eventually, the feed died completely. The drone had lost connection. Jared told me to pull back, but I felt like I was missing something. I tried to re-establish the link for almost 10 minutes. The feed came back for a few seconds, enough to show me a faint glow in the center of the clearing. A kind of pale blue light that wasn't from the sun or any visible source. Then it went dark again. When we finally landed and I went to review the footage on the laptop, the files from the drone were corrupted starting right at the moment the light showed up. The last clear frames just showed the empty dirt circle. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about that clearing was off. I went back to the area a couple days later with my buddy Nate, who's into hiking and knows the local woods pretty well. We tried to find the clearing on foot. We bushwhacked for hours through thick undergrowth, but we never found anything resembling it. We kept checking the GPS coordinates, but the trees were all thick and solid, no gaps. I brought a metal detector and a few other tools, hoping to find some sign, maybe a buried pipe or a foundation. Nothing. The whole time, I kept feeling like I was being watched. I told Nate and he laughed it off, but the hairs on the back of my neck wouldn't lie. Every once in a while, the forest would fall completely silent. Even the wind would stop. It was like the clearing had some kind of presence that muted everything. When I finally gave up, I turned to head back and saw something move between the trees. Not running, just shifting. I tried to focus, but it melted back into the shadows before I could tell what it was. I haven't gone back since. The whole thing is still buried in my mind. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the clearing, but the footage on my camera was real. The light, the perfect circle, it was there. Just not on any map. No one else from the company talks about it. Maybe they think I'm overreacting. I'm not sure what we saw. It wasn't a landing pad or a campsite. It wasn't natural. But it was there, for those few minutes, just beyond the trees. I guess some places hold secrets that don't want to be found. I was working the overnight shift at the downtown airport control tower, the usual graveyard hours from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. It was late April, a cool, clear night with the kind of stillness that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. The city lights below stretched out like a glowing grid, and the airspace was pretty busy, considering the time. Plenty of domestic flights coming in and out, plus a few cargo planes on their way somewhere. My name's Jamie. I've been a radar controller for almost 5 years now, so I'm used to weird situations and traffic conflicts, but nothing like what happened that night. Around 2:15 a.m., I noticed a blip on the radar about 50 miles northeast of the airport at roughly 30,000 feet. That's normal enough. Planes cruise around that altitude all the time, but this one didn't match any flight plans or transponder codes. I ran the call sign again. No hits in any databases. I checked the usual flight tracking systems and cross-referenced with other controllers on the network. Nothing. That alone was weird, but not unheard of. Sometimes military aircraft fly under restricted codes, or private jets operate without squawked transponders for security reasons. But then I looked closer. The thing was just hovering, not cruising, not moving laterally, just sitting at 30,000 feet, dead still. That didn't sit right with me. I radioed the pilots of a nearby flight, a commercial jet heading inbound from Boston, and asked if they saw anything out the window. The captain replied back, voice a little shaky, saying he thought he saw a faint light way above them, but nothing solid. I couldn't get any more from him. I kept watching the blip, waiting for it to move or at least blink a code. But it stayed put. After a few minutes, it started climbing. Slowly at first, maybe a few hundred feet per minute, but then faster. The vertical speed picked up, and the blip shot straight up like it was heading to space. I double-checked everything to make sure it wasn't a glitch. The radar was working fine. I cross-checked with a secondary system at a neighboring tower. Both showed the same thing. As it climbed, it kept a perfectly straight line. No wobbling or course adjustments. No slowing down. I watched as it passed 35,000 feet, 40,000, and then it vanished. No signals, no transponder code, just gone. I tried to contact other regional centers, but no one else had anything on their scopes matching it. I kept reviewing the radar tape later, trying to catch a detail I might have missed, but the blip was clean. No echoes, no breakdowns, no interference. That's the official part. What I can't explain is what happened afterward. I was still in the tower, logging the event and filing the report. I stepped out on the observation deck for a breath of fresh air. The night was quiet, the city's hum distant but steady. I looked up. The sky was clear, but there was this odd glow, kind of a pale bluish sheen, right where the blip had disappeared. It didn't last long, maybe a few seconds, but it felt wrong, like the air had shifted around me. When I turned back inside, I found my radio scanner buzzing with static, then a faint, low humming sound underneath it. It wasn't coming from the equipment. I could feel it in my chest, like a vibration. I glanced around. No one else in the tower was reacting. I checked the radio again. The hum stopped. I shrugged it off, finished my paperwork, and got ready to clock out. But as I walked toward the break room, the lights flickered. Just once, but enough to make me pause. I'm used to old buildings and electrical quirks, but the timing was strange. Outside the tower windows, the city looked normal. No flashes, no sirens, no emergency vehicles. I stepped outside again, hoping the weird energy would clear. Instead, the humming came back, softer now, and there was a strange metallic scent in the air, like ozone, but mixed with something else I couldn't place. I didn't want to stick around, so I left and drove home. The rest of the night was quiet. I checked the news the next morning. No reports of strange lights or aircraft, no military alerts, nothing. The radar logs were inconclusive in the official report. A few days later, I heard from a buddy at the FAA. He said there'd been some chatter about a ghost target in the system, but nothing confirmed. I kept thinking about that light in the sky, the way the blip climbed straight up, and that humming in the tower. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't like any aircraft I've ever tracked. My daughter, June, and I were sitting on the porch steps of our little place outside Flagstaff. It was late spring, just past dusk, and the sky was clear with that sharpness you only get when the desert cools down after a hot day. June had just finished her dinner and wanted to watch the stars. We don't have a fancy telescope or anything, just a couple of blankets and a shared fascination with the night sky. She was about 6 at the time, curious as hell about everything. I remember she was pointing up, squinting at this particular star. "Daddy, that one's getting closer," she said, her voice low like she was sharing a secret. I looked where she was pointing, thinking maybe it was just a plane or a satellite moving across the sky. But it didn't look like that. It was just one bright star, the kind you see in the middle of a cluster of tiny ones. The thing was, over the next 20 minutes, that star did seem to grow brighter, almost like it was moving closer to us. I shrugged it off at first, thinking maybe it was some weird atmospheric thing, like the way the lights of a plane can look bigger when it's low. But June kept watching it intently, her eyes wide. "It's getting bigger too," she said quietly. I tried to stay calm, not to freak her out. I told her maybe it was just a plane or a helicopter with a really strong spotlight, but I didn't see any flashing lights or hear any engines, and it didn't move side to side like something flying overhead normally would. The light just got brighter and bigger, and I swear it wasn't moving across the sky like a plane. It was staying in the same spot, but getting closer, like something was descending from way up high, slowing down, coming nearer without changing its position horizontally. By this point, June was sitting very still, holding my hand and whispering, "Look, Daddy, it's right there now." Her little fingers were trembling a bit. I wanted to tell her it was nothing, just light tricking us, but honestly, I was starting to get a little uneasy. After about 20 minutes of watching, the light was really bright. Way brighter than any star or satellite I'd ever seen, but it still didn't make any noise. No humming, no engines, nothing. Then, just as suddenly as it got big and bright, it disappeared. Just vanished, like someone switched off a light. June looked at me, confused. "Where did it go?" she asked. I had no answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. The whole thing felt off. I kept checking outside, hoping I was wrong, but the sky was empty again, quiet and still, like nothing had happened. I tried to tell myself it was a satellite burning up or some kind of flare, but none of it matched what we saw. No falling motion, no sound, no trail. It was just there, getting closer, then gone. The weirdest part was how real it all felt. Like it wasn't just a trick of the eye or imagination. And June seemed like she was seeing it just as clearly as I was. I've gone back to that night 100 times trying to piece it together. But it stuck with me, that strange feeling of watching something get closer from so far away and then disappear into nothing. I was on the night shift at the Cedar Ridge Observatory, a small but pretty important research station nestled up in the Cascades. My job was mostly monitoring the telescopes, checking the data streams, and making sure everything ran smoothly while the big brains slept. It was a quiet gig, mostly paperwork and occasional troubleshooting, perfect for someone who likes peace and hates crowds. The place sits on a ridge, miles from the nearest town, with nothing but trees and sky around. The nights out there are always dark, the kind of dark that lets you see every star in the sky if it's clear. This one night, the sky was crystal clear, no clouds, no haze. I remember that because it was unusual for spring, and the astronomers were excited about a particular set of observations. We had 4 telescopes online, each pointed at different parts of the sky. I was keeping an eye on the logs, running diagnostics, and jotting down notes when something odd happened. At around 1:15 a.m., the signal from Telescope 3 just dropped. No warning, no error messages, nothing. The monitor went blank like the feed was cut off. I hit the reset button and tried to reconnect, but nothing worked. The connection just wasn't there. What creeped me out more was the last image captured before the blackout. It showed this blurry, shifting shape covering nearly half of the field of view, blotting out the stars. The blur was smeared like something moving really fast right in front of the lens. But there shouldn't have been anything near the telescope physically. It's housed in a locked dome, and the dome's security alarm was silent. I double-checked the security footage for the last 2 hours. No one approached the building, no weird shadows, no animals messing with the equipment. Everything was normal. The cameras caught the usual raccoons scurrying by hours before, but nothing near the dome at the time the signal dropped. I called my coworker, Dana, who was in the next building. She wasn't on shift, but lives in the small cabin on the property and sometimes drops in at night. She said she didn't hear or see anything unusual. The place was too quiet. I sat back in my chair, staring at the frozen screen. I felt this chill creeping up my spine, even though the room was warm. I tried to shake it off. Then the power flickered, just for a second, enough to make all the monitors blink off and on. Nothing else seemed affected, just the observatory's equipment. I went outside for some fresh air. The night was so still, it felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. I looked up. The The stars were bright, endless, but in one patch above the ridge, they seemed slightly dimmer, like a faint shadow crossing the sky. I blinked, and it was gone. Jasper, my border collie mix, who was resting in the kennel nearby, perked his ears and started growling low and quiet. He's usually calm at night, but something unsettled him. I walked down the path to check the power box. Everything looked normal. No blown fuses, no unusual readings. The blinking stopped. Back inside, I tried reconnecting to telescope 3 again. The feed remained dead. Then, the strange thing happened. My phone buzzed with a notification, an incoming text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was just a single word. Look. I checked outside again. The forest was still. Jasper was quiet now, but watching me closely. I didn't reply. I turned on the TV, tried to distract myself. Nothing on the news or weather report mentioned anything strange. Later, at 3 a.m., I heard a soft hum coming from the direction of Telescope 3's dome. Like a low vibration, almost mechanical, but steady and constant. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out, Jasper following. The dome was locked tight. No way anyone got in. The hum stopped when I got close. I checked the camera feed one last time and noticed the blurry shape on the last image wasn't random motion. It had a shape, elongated, almost organic, like a shadow cast by something moving just out of focus. I spent the rest of the night sitting there, half watching the sky, half watching the screens. No more blurs, no more signals lost, but the feeling lingered, like something had brushed past the edge of everything I knew. I packed up at dawn and drove home through the empty mountain roads. Jasper was quiet in the back seat. The next day, the observatory replaced the telescope's camera, but they never found what caused the blackout. I still don't know what the blur was, or why the power flickered, or why I got that text. But every time I look up at the stars now, a part of me wonders, what else is out there, just out of sight? I'd been driving all afternoon, trying to get out of the city and into the country before dark. The traffic had been terrible, and honestly, I was wiped. It was one of those stretches on Route 39 where it's just trees on either side, nothing but dense woods and maybe the occasional farmhouse that looked long abandoned. I wasn't in a hurry anymore, so I figured I'd pull over, rest my eyes for a bit. There was a little turnout just off the road, barely big enough for 1 or 2 cars. I pulled in, killed the headlights, but left the engine running. That way, the heater would keep me warm. It was mid-October, cold enough that the heat was necessary, but not freezing yet. The sky outside was overcast, kind of that dull gray that makes everything look a little drained. Perfect for a nap, I thought. I reclined the driver's seat back, closed my eyes, and tried to clear my mind. Next thing I know, I'm waking up. The engine is still humming. The dashboard clock says 9:42 p.m., except I have zero memory of actually falling asleep. 1 minute I was sitting there thinking about pulling over, the next it's pitch dark and way later than I thought. It's like I blinked and time just jumped ahead by a couple hours. I checked my phone right away. The lock screen showed the time and it matched the clock on the dash. No problem there. But then I opened the call history. Nothing. No outgoing calls, no missed calls, no incoming calls. Completely wiped clean. That struck me as weird because I'd been on the phone earlier that afternoon. I remember clearly. I talked to my sister, left a voicemail for my boss, even called the mechanic to confirm my appointment next week. All of that should have shown up in my call log. But it was all gone. I sat up straighter and looked out the window. The woods were thick and quiet. No streetlights, no other cars. Just the faint outline of the trees against the dark sky. I tried to shake off the weird feeling creeping in and restarted the phone. No change. The call history was blank. Then I noticed something else. My GPS app wasn't responding. It kept freezing on the loading screen, like it couldn't get a satellite signal. But that stretch of Route 39 is normally covered pretty well. I glanced back at the clock on the dashboard. It was the same as the phone's time. But I had no idea what time it was before I pulled over, so I had no baseline to compare to. Trying to piece it all together, I figured maybe I'd just been more exhausted than I thought. Maybe I drifted off, slept for a couple hours, and when I woke up, the phone glitched and lost all its data. It wasn't impossible. Still, I grabbed my jacket and stepped out into the cold night air, stretching and shaking off the stiffness. The forest around me felt different, though. Like, the trees weren't just quiet, but almost waiting. I walked around the turnout and stared back at the road. There was no other traffic. Not a single car passed the whole time I was there. I tried to call someone on my phone, my sister, my friend Carlos, but the calls wouldn't connect. It said no service. That was another red flag. I'd just been on the phone hours ago. How could I have lost signal so suddenly in the middle of nowhere? I started feeling uneasy. I went back to the car and turned off the engine, planning to head inside the small diner a mile down the road. But when I reached over to turn the key, the engine sputtered but stayed on. The key was still in the ignition, but it was like the car was stuck halfway between on and off. The radio was playing static faintly in the background. I took the key out and put it back in, but the engine never fully shut off. I remember that well. There was a weird buzzing feeling in my chest, like the car was humming in a way it shouldn't. I locked the doors and sat back, trying to calm down. Then I noticed the rearview mirror. There was a faint glow behind the car, just beyond the edge of the turnout. I swung the door open and stepped out again, the cold hitting me like a wall. I didn't want to look, but I had to know. The glow wasn't from headlights or a flashlight. It was low to the ground, almost like the soft pulse of a lantern, but a pale blue color that didn't seem natural. I scanned the tree line and saw nothing. No headlights, no figures. I stared a little longer and then it blinked out, just like that. I felt my heart speed up. I got back in the car and locked the doors again. The silence was thick, no radio static, no engine noise. The car's dashboard was dead. Everything powered off completely this time. I pulled my phone out again. The screen was back to normal, the call history restored. Calls from earlier that day were there again, as if nothing had ever changed. My GPS worked too. It was 11:43 p.m., 2 hours later than before. I tried calling my sister again. This time it connected. I told her what happened, but she sounded half asleep, said she didn't know what to make of it. Driving back, the road was empty. The woods on either side just trees, nothing strange. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that blue glow again. It never came. Back home, I checked the car and the phone thoroughly. No problems. Everything worked fine. But I can't shake the feeling that something happened during those missing 2 hours. Something that shouldn't have. The fact that the engine was still running when I woke up, the call log vanishing and then reappearing, that weird blue light that wasn't a light at all. I've driven that road dozens of times alone at night. Nothing like this ever happened before. And I don't know what to make of it. I was out on the boat with my girlfriend Jamie on a Thursday night. We'd been sailing for a few hours, about 5 miles off the coast of Maine, just past the usual fishing spots. The water was calm, almost glassy, and the sky was clear, with a few stars blinking in the cool night air. The wind was light but steady enough to keep us moving slowly through the dark water. We had anchored near a small patch of deeper water where the ocean floor drops off sharply. It's usually a good spot for seeing marine life, and Jamie had brought along her underwater camera to try and catch something on video. I was manning the helm, mostly just enjoying the quiet, when Jamie called me over. "Come look at this," she said, her voice low and tense. I walked to the bow and peered over the edge. The water below was dark, almost black, but faintly lit from the boat's underwater lights. Then I saw it, something large moving beneath us, just out of reach of the lights. At first, I thought it was a whale, or maybe a big school of fish, but it wasn't behaving right. It moved too slowly, too deliberately. And the shape was wrong. It wasn't like any whale or shark I'd seen before. It was huge, definitely bigger than a humpback, but perfectly symmetrical. The edges were smooth and rounded, like some kind of massive, glowing jellyfish. Except it was solid, and its glow wasn't natural bioluminescence. It was an even, pale blue light that pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. Jamie and I exchanged a look. Neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the water lapping against the hull and the distant call of a loon somewhere on the shore. The shape passed slowly beneath the boat, keeping pace with us for a minute or two before drifting off into the darkness. I grabbed my flashlight and tried to scan the water around us, but the beam barely cut through the black. The ocean was deep here, and whatever it was, it didn't come up for air or anything. Jamie tried the underwater camera, but it wasn't designed for conditions this deep or dark, so the images were blurry shadows at best. Still, the glow showed up in every frame, shifting and moving like something alive, but utterly alien. We spent the next hour just sitting there, watching and waiting, but the shape never returned. Later, while Jamie was making coffee inside the cabin, I went out to check the deck lights and noticed something odd. There were no stars overhead. The sky was black, but I could see faint clouds rolling in from the horizon. When Jamie came out, she said, "I don't remember clouds. It was clear earlier." I checked my watch. The last time I looked at it was maybe 20 minutes ago. But now it read 1:10 a.m., and Jamie said it felt like no more than 45 minutes had passed since the sighting. We shrugged it off, blaming the weird sense of time on being tired and out on the water late at night. On the way back to shore the next morning, the radio was crackling with reports of strange lights seen from boats miles away, all describing a slow-moving, glowing shape beneath the surface. None of the local fishermen or Coast Guard could explain it, and no radar or sonar had picked up anything. I kept thinking about that shape, the way it moved, so calm and deliberate, the way the light pulsed under the water like it had a rhythm. It wasn't like any animal or machine. We made it back safe, but the ocean that night felt bigger and stranger than it ever had before. Something was down there, just beyond sight, watching us maybe. I still don't know what it was. I'm a wildlife biologist, and part of my job is monitoring animal activity in a fairly remote part of the Appalachians. Last fall, I was working on a study tracking black bear movements and installed a few new trail cameras in an area that hadn't been covered before. The site was about a mile from the nearest road, deep in the woods where the trees crowd close and the canopy's thick. I put the camera up one afternoon right before dusk on a sturdy oak about 5 feet off the ground. The weather was calm, just a little cool with a slight breeze. The kind of day where the light starts to shift from golden to twilight in a way that makes everything look quiet and still. I set the camera to take photos every 5 minutes and motion-triggered video, hoping to catch some nocturnal animal activity. 2 weeks later, I hiked back to check the camera. The walk-in was silent except for the occasional snap of twigs underfoot. I felt on edge, not because of anything I saw, but because being alone in those woods always sets my senses on high alert. When I got to the spot, the camera was fine, no signs of damage or interference. I took out the SD card and headed back to my cabin about 30 minutes away. That night, I plugged the card into my laptop to review the footage. Most of it was typical. Blurry shots of leaves swaying, occasional deer or raccoon passing through, nothing unexpected. Then I came across a single still photo that stopped me cold. It was taken around 3:17 a.m. according to the timestamp. What caught my eye was the lighting. The entire scene, trees, underbrush, the ground, was lit as if it were broad daylight, bright enough to see every detail clearly, but there was no hint of moonlight or artificial light anywhere. And there had been no storm that night, no lightning recorded in any weather reports. I checked the other photos and videos taken before and after. They all showed the same nighttime darkness, dim outlines barely visible, as expected. Only this one frame was lit like midday. At first, I thought it might be a glitch, a camera sensor flaring, or some software artifact. I scrolled through other images from different cameras in the area, same model, and there was nothing like this. No one else had reported any strange light. I was the only one out there. The next day, I went back to the site with a handheld light meter to check the ambient light levels at that exact spot and time, trying to replicate whatever could have caused the brightness. The meter showed darkness, moonless, no streetlights or cabins nearby, nothing that could explain it. I set up the camera again, positioned the same way, hoping to catch whatever happened. For the next 10 days, nothing unusual showed up on the footage. But then, on the morning I went to retrieve the card again, I noticed something else odd. The ground beneath the camera, a patch of moss and leaf litter, looked strangely disturbed. Not like animal tracks, too random and shallow, almost like someone or something had lightly scraped the surface with a hand or a tool. I took pictures, but the disturbance looked subtle and could have been overlooked if I wasn't paying close attention. That afternoon, I told my colleague Mara about the strange photo and the ground. She's a skeptical person, practical and no nonsense. Maybe some hunter or camper passed through and messed with the camera or the ground, she said. But why leave just a perfect circle of disturbance? Weird. We agreed to go out together the following weekend to check the area more thoroughly. When we arrived, the forest felt unnaturally still. No birds, no insects, nothing moving. Usually, even in the early morning, there's a hum of life in the trees, but this time it was silent in a way that made my skin crawl. We walked around the camera site, scanning the area. Mara pointed out that the trees nearby looked different. They weren't sick or dead, but the bark on a few oaks had a faint sheen, almost like it had been polished. The effect was subtle, but noticeable once you saw it. I couldn't explain it. We collected some samples of the bark and soil, trying to find any clue. That night, back at the cabin, I studied the strange daylight photo again, zooming in. In the background, behind the trees, there was a barely visible shape. Tall, thin, standing still, too tall to be a deer or human. It was shadowed and hard to make out, but it wasn't any animal I recognized. I showed the image to Mara. She just shrugged. Could be a trick of the light or a double exposure, she said, but her voice didn't have its usual certainty. I asked around locally, but no one else had seen anything like it. No reports of weird lights or strange figures. Over the next few weeks, I kept checking the cameras remotely when I could, but no repeat of that bright frame ever happened. One night, while I was reviewing footage at the cabin, the power flickered briefly. When it came back on, the timestamp on the laptop had jumped ahead by nearly an hour, and on the camera footage, there was a blank gap where the files had been corrupted. I felt that creeping feeling again, like I was missing something important. I kept the camera running one more week, but the forest remained silent and dark. When I finally took down the camera for good, I left it on my desk. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself staring at that bright photo, the way the trees look too clear, too still, and the shadowy figure barely visible behind the trunks. I don't know what was out there that night. Whatever it wasn't just a trick of light or sensor error. The woods kept their secret. I was 16 when it happened. It was the summer before junior year, hot and dry, barely any breeze at night. I grew up in a small town called Claremont, kind of wedged between farmland and some rolling hills that people like to pretend were mountains. It was quiet, too quiet most nights, especially after 10. That night, I'd snuck out to meet up with a couple friends, Cassie and Trenton, behind the gas station on Pine. We didn't do anything crazy, mostly just sat around talking, messing with our phones, occasionally passing a cheap vape someone had stolen from their older brother. It wasn't really about what we were doing, just about not being home. We hung out longer than usual. I remember looking at Cassie's phone at one point, and it was 12:11 a.m. My curfew was 11, but my parents didn't check on me unless I gave them a reason. Still, I knew I should head back before I pushed my luck. My house was about a mile and a half from the gas station, across a couple neighborhoods that looked almost exactly the same. Dim yellow streetlights, all the same style mailboxes, sidewalks with cracks in the same spots. Trenton offered to walk with me halfway, but I told him not to bother. I actually liked walking alone at night. It was one of the only times the town felt like it had some space to it. No cars, no dogs barking, just the occasional porch light left on. So I started walking. It wasn't a full moon, but close to it. Clear sky, stars out. My phone was at 9%, so I stuck it in my pocket and just walked in silence, cutting through some back lots and alleys I knew well. I was about 3 blocks from my house, right by the stretch of elm where the road curves up slightly and there's a little row of duplexes on one side, empty lots on the other. I remember hearing the faint hum of a transformer from one of the utility poles and the soft clink of my shoelace hitting the side of my sneaker. That's how quiet it was. That's when I saw the figure. It was standing on the roof of one of the duplexes. Just standing. Not crouched. Not moving. Still. Right on the ridge of the roofline, like it had just stepped up there and froze. No motion. No sound. I stopped walking. The street light near the house flickered just a bit. Not fully out, just that quick, dim bright shift they do sometimes. And in that moment, I looked up again, and the figure was gone. Not like it climbed down or moved, just wasn't there anymore. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, staring at the roof. I even stepped into the road to get a clearer angle, like maybe it had just shifted to a spot I couldn't see from the sidewalk. Nothing. I pulled out my phone to check the time. I thought maybe I'd zoned out or something. It said 1:23 a.m. I stared at it for a second, then hit the side button and checked again. Still 1:23. I didn't panic, not right away. I thought maybe Cassie's phone had been wrong earlier, or maybe I'd misread it. But that didn't sit right with me. I was good at remembering numbers, and I knew I'd seen 12:11 before I left. The walk should have taken me 20 minutes max, not over an hour. I walked the rest of the way home without looking back. Every sound felt louder. The buzz of the lights, the slight rustle of leaves. Even the sound of my own breathing started to feel weird, like it was bouncing back at me from somewhere it shouldn't. I got home and let myself in through the garage. My parents were asleep. The TV in the living room still playing one of those late-night fishing shows my dad likes to leave on. I went upstairs, straight into the bathroom to check the clock in there. Same time as my phone, 1:27 now. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to remember the walk. All of it. Every step, every street. I could remember the first few blocks clearly. The corner store with the busted freezer, the alley behind Miss Harville's place with the weird graffiti. But after that, things got hazy. Not missing exactly, just flat. Like remembering a dream you're not sure you actually had. I didn't sleep that night. I laid down eventually, but I didn't close my eyes. Not until it got light out. The next morning, I asked Cassie what time I left. She looked confused and said, "Right after midnight. You said it was like 12:10. Trenton agreed. He even showed me a text he'd sent me at 12:14 that never got delivered because my phone was on Do Not Disturb. The timestamp lined up. I didn't tell them what I saw. I didn't want to sound nuts. That afternoon, I walked back to Elm Street. Broad daylight, cars passing, people mowing their lawns. I looked at the roof of that duplex. Nothing unusual. No ladder, no obvious way up. It wasn't a high roof, but it wasn't something you could just casually step onto either. No security cameras I could see. The yard was empty. I stayed there a while, just looking, listening. There was a noise I hadn't noticed before. A faint ticking sound coming from one of the power boxes mounted near the side of the house. Not mechanical, more like a soft click, 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 almost like static, but sharper. I got close to it, thinking maybe it was just some old wiring, but the sound stopped as soon as I got within a few feet. When I backed up, it started again. Forward, silence. Back, click, click, click. I left after that. Haven't been back to that block since. Nothing like that ever happened again. But I changed the lock screen on my phone after that night. Set it to show the time in extra large numbers, just so I wouldn't miss it if something ever felt off again. It hasn't. But I still check every time I walk alone. We were up at the cabin in late March. Still cold at night, snow lingering in the shaded parts of the ridge, but clear skies and dry roads made it manageable. My wife, Jeanette, had been asking to get up there before summer. She likes it best when it's still too cold for the tourists to come poking around. Just us and the mountains. No cell service, no neighbors. Closest occupied house is nearly 3 miles down the gravel. We built the place back in '91. Nothing fancy. Single story with a covered porch, small wood stove, solar setup for lights. No TV, no internet. We bring books and a deck of cards. Jeanette likes her jigsaw puzzles. I do the cooking. We're both 70 now. Been retired a while. It was a Monday evening, I think. Around 8:45. We just finished eating lentil soup and cornbread, and I stepped out to the porch with a mug of hot cider to listen for owls. I'm used to the sounds up there, wind through the trees like occasional coyote yipping down the slope. But it was real still that night. No breeze, no bugs. Moon not up yet, but the stars were bright. I leaned against the railing and scanned the sky like I always do. You get a view straight across the next ridge, miles of tree line, and that's when I saw them. 3 lights, small, pale yellow, moving west to east across the sky, just above the mountain line. They were in a triangle, not a perfect one, more like a scalene, and they kept that shape steady as they moved. Not fast, not slow, just smooth, no sound at all. At first I figured they were planes, but there were no strobes, no blinking, no color change, and they weren't in a flight path I'd ever seen. We get commercial airliners sometimes, way higher up, heading toward Denver. You can hear the rumble long before you see the lights. These didn't make a sound. I went back in and called Jeanette to come look at Play. She grabbed her fleece and followed me out. By then, the lights had moved farther east, but they were still visible, still in formation. We both watched them until they slipped behind the eastern ridge. It took maybe 4 or 5 minutes total. Jeanette didn't say much, just asked if I'd ever seen anything like that before. I hadn't. Not quite like that. We stayed out another 10 minutes, but nothing else happened, so we went back inside. That should have been the end of it. But around 1:30 a.m., something woke me up. I couldn't say what exactly. No bang or crash, just the sense that something had changed. The cabin was dead silent, and Jeanette was still asleep beside me. I got up, pulled on my boots, and opened the front door. The porch was cold. My breath fogged. I stood there, letting my eyes adjust, and then I saw them again. Same 3 lights, same shape. But they weren't in the sky this time. They were lower, maybe just above the tree line across the narrow valley. I know how far those trees are. I could hike it in about 40 minutes. The lights were just hovering above the pines, not moving, not swaying. I watched them for a long time, 10 minutes, maybe longer. They didn't drift or change, just hung there. Then one of them started to dim, not flicker, dim, faded down to nothing over about 30 seconds. The other 2 stayed put. Jeanette came out in her robe and stood next to me. She'd woken up and saw I wasn't in bed. We stood there together in the cold, watching those 2 remaining lights. They didn't move. Then the second one dimmed, same as the first. That left just 1. It stayed there for what felt like forever. I remember because I started to feel the cold in my fingers, but I didn't want to go inside. Then that last light did something different. It blinked. Once. A slow, pulsing kind of blink. Not sharp, just a gradual fade out and back in. Then it slid sideways, maybe 50 feet to the right, and stopped. Then it blinked again, and after a few seconds, it dimmed out completely. We stood there another 20 minutes, just in case. But that was it. The next morning, I checked the snow on the ridges with my binoculars. No tracks. Nothing disturbed. We didn't talk about it much. We had coffee, did the crossword like usual. That afternoon, I walked down to the base of the ridge. It took the narrow game trail up to where I thought the lights had been. No signs of anything. No burn marks, no flattened brush. Nothing. Nothing. We stayed the rest of the week, didn't see the lights again. But every night before bed, we stepped onto the porch and looked out at the ridge. And every night, the forest felt too quiet. I flew drones for side gigs, real estate, weddings, the occasional event when someone wanted overhead shots of a car meet or fireworks or whatever. I did it on top of my regular job at the printing shop just to pad things out a little, and because I liked messing around with gear. This happened last fall, October. I remember because the leaves had just started turning and the air finally didn't feel like soup anymore. I had a drone shoot scheduled for a guy named Vic who ran a landscaping business. He wanted some promo footage of a big property he'd just finished. Real clean lines, trimmed hedges, lighting wired into the walkways. It was in this newer subdivision out past Old Town, tucked behind the golf course. The shoot was scheduled for 8:30 p.m. because he wanted everything lit up. You couldn't really appreciate the yard lighting during the day, and he didn't want to wait for full dark. So I showed up a little after 8, talked to him about the angles he wanted, did a quick walkthrough of the yard, then got set up in the cul-de-sac while he went back inside. It was just me, the drone case, my controller, and the small folding chair I bring for long jobs. Everything was pretty normal at first. I launched around 8:35. The sun had set fully by then, but there was still a little bit of ambient light in the sky. I sent the drone up to about 60 feet, then did a slow orbit of the property while recording. The live feed was coming through clear on the tablet mounted to my controller. I use a Skydio, solid signal, good range, never really had problems with it. The camera's 4K, smooth gimbal, responsive controls. I've logged hundreds of hours with it. About 15 minutes in, while I was doing a slow flyover of the backyard from east to west, I noticed a flicker in the lower corner of the live feed. Not a glitch, more like something moving just out of frame. I figured maybe a bird bug passed near the lens. That happens sometimes. I kept going. But then, as the drone moved past the pool, something appeared again, right at the edge of the video. A shape. It looked like a darker blur against the sky. Not a shadow, more like a patch of something that wasn't reflecting light the same way. But when I looked up, nothing, just stars. I stopped the drone midair and hovered it. On the screen, I could still see part of the thing. I adjusted the camera downward, upward, panned slowly. It didn't move, but it stayed in the corner of the frame like it was just outside the field of view, tracking with the drone. I looked up again. Still nothing. Just open air. Completely clear sky. No clouds, no birds, nothing that should have been there. Then I panned the drone's camera to the right, and whatever the shape was, it moved with it. That's when I got unsettled. I wasn't seeing anything with my own eyes, but on the feed, this thing was there. No detail, no lights, just a faint outline, almost like heat distortion, following the drone's rotation like it was mirrored. I pulled the drone up higher, thinking maybe it was something on the ground reflecting back strangely. At 90 feet, it was still there. At 120, it got closer. Closer on the feed, I mean, not in real life. I still saw nothing above me. I was just sitting in the dark with the low buzz of the drone somewhere overhead, staring at a screen that showed a shape that should have been visible, but wasn't. I turned off all the drone's lights, just to see what would happen. Sometimes the reflection off the LED ring can mess with the feed. With the lights off, the image got grainier, but the shape stayed. Now it was more distinct, oval-ish, smooth, kind of matte looking on camera. Yeah, like it wasn't bouncing back any ambient light. Still no sound, no wind, no movement around me. I tapped the screen to focus. The autofocus pulsed once, then kind of jittered and refused to lock on. That had never happened before. Then the feed cut for half a second, just blinked out, black screen, then came back. I held my breath. That was new. The drone hovered just fine. I could still see its telemetry data. No errors. Battery was at 72%. I started slowly flying it backward, trying to ease away from whatever was tailing it. The shape didn't follow right away. For a few seconds, it stayed where it was. Then it started sliding sideways across the feed, matching speed. I was maybe 5 minutes into this when I noticed something else. My controller felt warm. Not hot, but noticeably warm. That doesn't happen. I don't overclock anything. There aren't even moving parts in the controller that would heat up. I looked down, touched the back of the tablet, also warm. And then I heard something. Not from above, not in the air, but from the earpiece I wear when flying solo at night. It's just a simple Bluetooth earbud I use to monitor audio if I'm recording sound. I hadn't even been paying attention to this clicking sound. Rapid, quiet, irregular, like someone gently tapping a fingernail against a mic. I thought maybe it was feedback or interference, but it wasn't rhythmic. It kept changing speed. Sometimes fast, then a pause, then slower. Almost like Morse code, but not structured enough. I pulled the earbud out, the sound stopped, plugged it back in, dead quiet. I looked at the screen again. The shape was gone. I spun the drone in a full 360. Nothing, just the backyard, the roof lines, a few porch lights. I switched on the drone's LED again and did a slow drop back down to 60 feet. Still nothing. I circled the property again. I recorded for another 10 minutes, even though my hands were shaking a little. I didn't want to spook the client, and I figured if it happened again, I'd have it on tape. It didn't. I landed the drone in the driveway and packed up without saying much. Vic came out to say thanks and asked if I got good stuff. I just told him I'd send him the files later in the week. I didn't mention anything. Back home, I transferred everything to my desktop. The footage was there, all of it, including the weird part. I scrubbed through it slowly. You could see it clear as day on the live feed. But the recorded footage? Nothing. No shape, no distortion, no tracking, just smooth aerial footage of a backyard at night. I checked the raw data, no anomalies, bitrate normal, file size consistent with what I shot. No dropouts, no corrupted frames. The only thing that stuck out was a 3-second gap in the flight log. From 8:49:12 to 8:49:15, the drone's location didn't update. No elevation change, no coordinates. Then it picked back up like nothing happened. That's not normal either. The Skydio logs every second without fail. I didn't report anything, didn't know who I would have even reported it to. I still use that drone, still fly gigs, but I don't fly at night anymore unless someone's there with me, and I don't wear the earpiece. The place where I work as a night security guard is this old, mostly abandoned airfield on the outskirts of Cedar Creek, Montana. Not much flying goes on anymore, just a handful of small planes now and then, mostly private pilots or crop dusters in the summer. The rest of the airfield is just empty runways, cracked pavement, and hangars slowly rusting away. The company I work for is contracted to watch over the place, make sure no one's sneaking around after hours. I usually do the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift alone, except for my German Shepherd, Juno. She's my companion and backup, always alert, and she hates the cold as much as I do. The nights around here in early October get cold fast, and the airfield feels especially empty and exposed. The kind of place where even your own footsteps sound strange. One night, around 5:30 a.m., I was going through the last round of my usual checks. It was a foggy morning. The kind where the mist sticks close to the ground and swallows up the runway lights. You couldn't see much past the end of the runway itself, and the whole place felt even more isolated than usual. I was in the control tower, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the security monitors. Most cameras were just showing empty asphalt and dead grass, but there's this one camera that points down the longest runway, a spot where planes usually take off. The camera is mounted on a pole about 20 feet up, giving a wide shot of the concrete. I was about to check the time on my watch when something caught my eye on that screen. There was a faint shape sitting on the runway about halfway down. I blinked, leaned closer. It was dark, kind of like a shadow, but the shape was weird, too round and smooth to be a car or a piece of trash. It didn't look like any plane I'd seen around here. I switched the camera feed to full screen, zoomed in as much as I could. The shape was still there. No lights, no movement. Just this dark silhouette sitting there on the cold runway. I felt a chill even though the room was warm. Juno, sitting by my feet, stiffened and growled softly. That was odd. She's usually calm at work unless there's something really wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and coat, decided to check it out in person. The fog was thick as I stepped outside, and the air smelled like damp earth and old fuel. I called Juno, and she came right away, tail down but ears perked. As I walked toward the runway, the shape seemed to get bigger in the distance. I kept telling myself it was probably some old equipment or maybe one of those weather balloons or something. When I got closer, the fog thinned just enough that I could see it clearer. It was definitely not a plane, car, or any machine I recognized. The thing was low to the ground, about the size of a small van, but its surface looked strange. Matte black, almost like it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. No markings, no lights, nothing that made sense. I stopped maybe 30 feet away, shining my flashlight at it. The beam didn't reflect the way it should. It was like the object swallowed the light. Juno stayed close, but didn't growl anymore, just stared. I pulled out my phone, thinking to snap a picture, but the screen went black. Dead. No signal. No power. Weird, but I thought it might be the cold messing with the battery. I took a step back, and as I did, the thing just disappeared. No sound, no flash, just gone. I blinked, looked around, but the runway was empty again, just cracked concrete and fog drifting. I stood there a minute longer, heart racing, then called it in to dispatch, but the radio was dead too. I told them I'd keep an eye on things, then headed back to the tower. Once inside, I checked the security footage from that camera, hoping to catch whatever it was on tape. That's when I noticed something else. The footage from exactly 5:32 a.m. to 5:33 a.m., the time when I was outside, was completely corrupted. The video cut out, just static and glitching pixels, like a chunk of the file was missing. Every other camera's footage was fine, but this one had a perfect, uninterrupted glitch. I downloaded the clip, thinking it might be a tech error, but the corruption didn't look random. It looked like it was deliberately scrambled. I ran the file through recovery software. The program tried, but all I got was scrambled, distorted frames. No recognizable shapes, no movement, just weird pixel patterns. I showed it to my supervisor, who just shrugged and said, "Old equipment can be weird, maybe a faulty cable or interference." But that morning, after that happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was on the runway wasn't just some piece of forgotten junk. I checked the area the next day in daylight. Nothing unusual, no tire tracks, no footprints, no signs, anything had been there. Juno refused to go near that part of the runway, growling low if I tried to get her closer. I kept watching the footage every day after work, hoping for a hint, but that 1-minute glitch was always there. Exact, consistent, and frustratingly blank. Weeks passed with no sign of anything similar. No lights, no strange shapes, no more signal problems. Sometimes at night when the fog rolls in thick, I swear I see a dark shape far down the runway, just at the edge of visibility. I check the cameras, but that glitchy gap always stays. And Juno? She still won't step near that part of the airfield. I don't know what I saw. I don't know why the footage got corrupted exactly then, but every now and then I think about that silent, dark shape sitting there in the fog before disappearing, like it was never meant to be caught on camera at all. I was working a late shift delivering packages for a courier company out here in northern Vermont. The kind of job where you spend most of your time alone, driving winding country roads through stretches of forest and fields, especially once you get past the last few towns. I'd been doing this for about a year, so I knew the routes well enough to navigate without the GPS, but the app was still my go-to, especially at night. It was the end of October, a cool and clear evening just after sunset, and I was out doing a batch of deliveries that took me into some of the more remote areas. The kind of places where the trees lean over the road and the darkness presses in. I had a little beagle mix named Scout riding shotgun, and he dozed off in his crate by the time I was about halfway through the run. Around 8:45 p.m., I was driving down a narrow stretch of dirt road that snakes through a dense patch of pine and maple trees. I was almost to the next delivery, but the GPS started acting up. First, it lost the signal completely. The little dot representing my truck just froze on the screen. Usually, that'd clear up within a minute or two out here, but this time it didn't. I pulled over to the side, flipped the app off and on. Nothing. Then I rebooted the phone. Still no GPS signal. I checked the cellular bars, 2 bars, weak but there. I figured maybe the trees were blocking the satellite, so I sat there for a few minutes, watching the screen, waiting. The weird part was that the phone clock kept running, but the GPS just stayed frozen on the same spot. I didn't notice anything odd at first. No sounds, no flickering lights, just the usual quiet of the forest at night. Scout woke up and gave a soft whine, looking up at me. I tried calling dispatch to let them know I was stuck with a dead signal. The call wouldn't connect. No ring, no voicemail. The phone acted like I was out of service range. I checked the time again. 10 minutes had passed. I was starting to get annoyed, thinking maybe the phone was glitching. I decided to keep driving slowly, hoping the GPS would catch up. The road was narrow, just enough for one truck, with thick woods pressing in on both sides. The headlights cut through the darkness in front of me, but the GPS stayed frozen on that same spot, like I was parked there, even though I was moving. Then something else started to feel off. The trees didn't seem to be passing like they should. It was as if the world outside the truck was static. I stopped the truck and got out, trying to listen for any sounds. Birds, bugs, wind. Nothing. Just an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. Scout growled low in his crate. I checked the time again. It was 20 minutes later. I sat back in the driver's seat, decided to keep going. The phone still no GPS. Then, all at once, the GPS signal came back. The map on my screen jumped forward. It showed I was already several miles down the road, past the next delivery point. I blinked at the phone, confused. I looked out the windshield. The road ahead looked familiar, but different, like I was somewhere I hadn't been yet, but also not far from where I'd been parked. I checked the clock on the dash. It was exactly 20 minutes later than when I'd lost the signal. But the weird thing was, I had zero memory of driving those miles. No memories of curves in the road, no sounds of tires crunching over gravel, no glimpses of trees or signs. Scout was quiet now, looking at me with those big eyes like he sensed something was wrong. I shook my head and tried to focus on the deliveries. I called dispatch again, and this time the call went through. I asked if anyone had reported any issues or strange signals in that area. The dispatcher said nothing unusual. I stopped at the next delivery address, a small cabin tucked back in the woods. The porch light was on, but no one answered when I knocked. On my way back, the GPS worked fine. But for the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about that stretch of road. No other drivers passed me. No animals crossed the road. And the silence during those 20 minutes, I've never heard anything like it before or since. I double-checked my phone the next day. No signs of errors or crashes. I tried to piece together what happened, but kept hitting a wall. Sometimes I wonder if I was driving at all during that time, or if I was just somewhere else, sitting still. The whole thing still puzzles me. I was sitting on the back porch one late summer evening, just after dinner, with my dog Luna, stretched out at my feet. The sky was mostly clear, a few clouds lingering low, and the air was warm but not sticky. I live on the edge of a small town in Vermont, so the backyard opens into a patch of woods behind the house. It's not a big yard, maybe an acre or so, but enough to have a lot of wildlife coming through. Deer, rabbits, squirrels, and the occasional fox. Luna, a scrappy little border collie mix with a coat the color of burnt sugar, usually spends evenings chasing shadows or nosing around in the bushes. That night I was scrolling on my phone, half paying attention to Luna, half just zoning out and watching the last light fade. I noticed the animals started acting weird. First, the squirrels stopped their usual scrambling through the trees and just froze, noses twitching. The rabbits in the grass behind the shed sat completely still, ears pointed straight up. Even the chipmunks, usually darting here and there, just stopped and stared. Luna sat up, ears perked, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Then the deer. I usually see a couple grazing quietly near the tree line when it's this time of day, but they stood like statues, heads lifted, muscles tense, eyes locked on the sky. All of them, every animal I could see, froze in place and stared upward. I felt a little uneasy, but figured it was just some predator or something out there they were all sensing. The thing is, though, I didn't hear anything. No rustling in the bushes, no branches snapping, nothing moving in the trees. Just this quiet, like the whole world was holding its breath. Then I heard it. A low hum. It wasn't loud, more like a vibration in the air, just beneath the level of my hearing at first. It grew slowly over a few minutes, steady, continuous, but never harsh or sharp, almost like the distant drone of a generator, but smoother, like a hum from a big machine far away. The animals didn't move the whole time, just staring. Luna let out a soft growl, but didn't bark or run. She stayed frozen beside me. The hum hung in the air for maybe 5 minutes or so. I tried to look around to figure out what was making it, but the sky was mostly dark by then, just a few stars scattered between patches of cloud. No lights, no planes, no helicopters. I pulled out my phone and tried using the flashlight to scan the tree line, but it didn't show anything unusual. The humming was coming from all directions at once, or maybe from the sky itself. It was hard to tell. Then, as slowly as it had started, the hum faded. The animals broke their frozen poses all at once. Rabbits darted into the bushes, squirrels leapt from branch to branch, the deer melted back into the trees like nothing had happened. Luna jumped up and ran a few feet ahead, looking back at me, but eager to chase whatever had spooked them. I stayed on the porch for a while longer, but the yard was empty. No signs of anything out of place. No footprints, no strange sounds. The only thing different was this quiet tension hanging in the air. I checked the clock. From the moment the animals froze to when they scattered was about 15, maybe 20 minutes. That's the part I can't shake. How every single animal, no matter how big or small, just stopped everything and stared at the sky like they were watching something nobody else could see. I kept trying to think if there was a logical explanation. Maybe some rare bird, a distant storm, or even a weird weather pattern, but nothing fit. Nothing ever got close to making that kind of synchronized reaction across such different species. I didn't see any light, no shapes in the sky, no aircraft or drones, nothing. Just that humming and their silence. The next day I asked my neighbor Mark if he'd heard anything strange. He said his dogs had been barking at the tree line for a while, then got quiet all of a sudden, but he didn't know why. No one else in town mentioned anything unusual. I've lived here for over 10 years. I know the woods, I know the animals. This was different. Sometimes when I'm out there at dusk, I watch the trees and listen, wondering if it'll happen again. Luna stays close by, eyes scanning the sky like she's expecting it. I don't know what it was, but I'm still trying to figure out what made everything stop and watch. I don't usually go fishing at night, but that summer I was staying at my uncle's cabin on Lake Carmichael out in northern Minnesota. It's one of those quiet spots where the nearest neighbor is a good mile or two away, the kind of place where the only sounds are the wind in the trees and the water lapping against the shore. My uncle, Pete, was out of town, so I had the cabin to myself for a week. I figured, why not try fishing after dark? I'd heard the base get more active then, and honestly, it was just a chance to get away from the usual noise and people. I packed my gear around 9 p.m., grabbed my old fishing rod, and headed down to the dock. The sky was mostly clear, but heavy with humidity from the day's heat. A faint mist was rising off the water, and the moon was a thin crescent, barely lighting the lake. I set up near the edge of the dock, threw in my line, and sat down on an old wooden crate I found near the boathouse. For the first hour, nothing, just the occasional splash from fish or maybe a frog somewhere in the reeds. The night was still except for the gentle hum of insects and the faint rustling of leaves. My dog, Rufus, a scrappy, wire-haired terrier mix, was curled up at my feet, mostly quiet except for the occasional twitch. Then I started noticing something odd. There was a faint tapping sound coming from the water, rhythmic but soft, like someone lightly drumming their fingers on a wooden table. At first I thought it might be a beaver or some kind of animal knocking against a submerged log, but the tapping was too regular, too deliberate to be animal behavior. It went on steadily, tap, 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 about once every 2 seconds. I looked around, scanning the surface for any sign of a boat or someone else out there. Nothing. No bobbing light, no silhouette, no movement except the gentle ripple of the water. Rufus lifted his head and growled low for a second, then settled back down. I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was just past midnight. Curiosity got the better of me, so I stood up and leaned over the railing, trying to see beneath the surface. The water was dark, almost black in the moonless parts, but right near the dock I could see faint ripples. That's when I noticed it, a shadow moving just beneath the water, not far from the dock. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a large, smooth shape sliding silently under the surface, shifting slowly, like it was watching. It wasn't a fish or a log drifting by. The way it moved didn't match anything I'd ever seen in a lake before. I froze and the tapping stopped right then. For maybe 10 seconds, everything was silent except my own breathing and Rufus's faint snoring. Then the tapping started again. Tap, tap, but this time it was coming from a different spot, maybe a few feet away from the first. I scanned the water again, but the shadow had disappeared. I sat back down, heart racing a bit, wondering if I was imagining it. I told myself it was probably just some weird reflection or a trick of the light. But Rufus stayed alert now, ears perked, eyes fixed on the water. I tried to focus on the fishing, cast my line back out, but the tapping kept coming, soft, rhythmic, and steady. It moved around the dock in small circles, always out of sight but close enough to hear clearly. I noticed something else. Every time the tapping stopped, the water near the dock would momentarily reflect the moonlight in an odd way, like something just beneath the surface was catching the light and moving it around. It wasn't random. It looked like a slow, shifting glow, changing shape but never breaking the water's surface. At one point, Rufus stood up, tail stiff, and growled low again. I scanned the shoreline, but there was nothing. No other people, no boats, just trees and water. I thought about packing up and going back inside, but something kept me there. I felt like I was being watched, but not in a threatening way, more like curiosity or study. After a while, the tapping stopped entirely. The water went still, quiet, except for the distant call of an owl. I waited a few more minutes, but nothing happened. The strange reflections faded, and the lake looked like any normal nighttime lake again. I packed up my gear, called Rufus, and headed back to the cabin, glancing over my shoulder a few times. Nothing followed. The next morning, I talked to a couple locals in the nearby town about odd things happening on the lake at night. They told me stories about weird lights and sounds people sometimes hear, but no one can explain. Nothing solid, just rumors and old tales. I kept thinking about that night for weeks afterward. The tapping, the shadow moving beneath the water, the strange reflections. I still don't know what I heard or saw, but I know it wasn't normal. And I never went fishing on Lake Carmichael at night again. I was the night shift keeper at the Cape Merrill Lighthouse last summer. The job's mostly quiet. Check the light, log the weather, listen for foghorns, and keep an eye on the sea. The lighthouse sits on a rocky point just north of a small fishing village, with nothing but ocean and sky around it. My closest neighbor was almost 2 miles away down a winding coastal road, so when I worked nights, it was just me, my dog Toby, and the waves. Toby is a big mutt, kind of a mix between a shepherd and something else. He's mellow but alert, the perfect companion for a lonely job like this. He usually snoozed near the lantern room during the late hours while I did my rounds. That night started like most others. The sky was clear and cool, a thin crescent moon barely lighting the cliffs. I just finished logging the 11 p.m. weather report. Temp steady, wind light from the northwest, no fog, and was sitting in the keeper's quarters sipping cold coffee, Toby stretched out at my feet. At about 11:45, Toby perked up, ears twitching. I looked out the window that faces the ocean horizon. That's when I saw them. A cluster of lights hovering low over the water about a mile off the coast, not blinking or flashing like ship's lights normally do, but steady, bright white, almost too bright. There were 6 of them, arranged in a loose pattern, like a subtle arc, spaced evenly but not perfectly symmetrical. They didn't move, not a flicker of motion from them. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the horizon, but the lights didn't change or shift. They just hung there, like a handful of frozen stars. I swear, I scanned and scanned for a boat or platform. No mass, no silhouette, no wakes in the water. The ocean was calm, almost mirror-like. No sign of anything that could hold those lights. I thought maybe they were some kind of fishing boats, but every light I know out here has a pattern: red, green, flashing, strobes, and these were just steady white points. Toby growled low and padded to the window, nose pressed against the glass. He didn't look away from the lights for a good minute, then slowly backed away and sat on his haunches. I went outside to the lantern room's balcony for a better look. The night air was cool, salty, and quiet except for the lapping of water against the rocks below. The lights stayed in place. I reached for my phone to snap a picture, but it kept freezing on the camera app, like the phone couldn't focus on the lights properly. Then, one by one, the lights started disappearing. It wasn't like they blinked out or moved away. They just vanished from brightest to dimmest, each going dark in a steady sequence, but without moving or changing shape. First, the rightmost light faded completely, then the next to its left, and so on, until only the leftmost light remained. After a moment, it too simply winked out like someone switched it off. The entire sequence took maybe 2 minutes, and the lights never moved closer or farther, never flickered or shifted, just disappeared, one by one. I stood there on the balcony, trying to process what I'd just seen. No boats out there, no aircraft, no buoys or markers that I could find on my charts, and nothing on the marine radio channels. Toby was quiet now, sitting by my feet, staring out at the empty horizon. I double-checked the sky. No planes, no helicopters, no satellites that I recognized. Just stars and that thin crescent moon. I went back inside and tried to call the village on the landline, but the line was dead. No dial tone. I figured it was a storm knocking out service somewhere, so I checked the weather radio. No alerts, just the usual ocean forecasts. That was the first strange thing. Next, I checked the lighthouse's automatic light sensor and backup systems. Everything was normal. I couldn't sleep for a while after that. I kept staring out at the ocean, half expecting the lights to come back, but they never did. Toby stayed close all night, not his usual calm self. The next morning, I drove down to the village and asked around, trying to find if anyone else had seen the lights. Nobody had. The fishermen said they'd been out late last night and saw nothing unusual. The Coast Guard reported no unusual traffic or signals. The weather stations confirmed clear skies and calm seas all night. The weirdest part was when I checked my phone later. The photos I tried to take were all blank, just gray frames with no image of the lights. I kept thinking back to how the lights vanished without moving. It didn't feel like anything I knew. No navigation lights, no aircraft, no floating platforms, just there and then gone. I still don't know what it was. Sometimes when I'm out on the balcony, Toby at my side, I watch that horizon and wonder if those lights are still out there somewhere, waiting to come back. It was around 3:40 in the morning when I first woke up. I remember because I looked at the clock on the stove after I got a drink of water. I wasn't supposed to be up. My back had been acting up again, and I'd finally managed to get a few hours of sleep, but something, I don't know, a sound maybe, pulled me out of it. I didn't hear anything specific when I sat up. House was quiet. My wife, Lorna, was still asleep. The dog, Cedar, hadn't made a peep. But I had that feeling, like when you think someone's standing in the doorway even though the room's empty. Not fear, not at first. Just that low-level awareness, like something was off. I figured maybe one of the cows had bumped the fence again. We'd had a couple storms that week, and the wire along the east pasture was sagging. So I got dressed, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped outside. It was colder than I expected. Not freezing, but more than it should have been for early May. No wind, no bugs. That was the first thing that hit me. The quiet. No frogs, no night birds. Just the gravel under my boots and the creak of the screen door behind me. Cedar didn't follow me out. He usually does, even at night. He's an old cattle dog, mostly blind now, but he still perks up when I move around. That night, he stayed curled up by the stove. I didn't notice that part until later. I headed down the slope behind the barn with the flashlight sweeping ahead. The beam wasn't reaching as far as it normally does, probably the fog. It wasn't thick, but it was clinging low, real patchy, especially around the tree line near the northern fence. Everything felt flat, like there was no depth to anything past the first 50 feet. That's when I saw them. All 16 of the cows, bunched up in the far northwest corner of the pasture, squeezed together like a pack of wet sheep. They weren't making a sound, no lowing, no shifting hooves, just standing there, pressed shoulder to shoulder, facing the same direction. I remember calling out just a short whistle and a "hey there," expecting at least one to flick an ear or turn. Nothing. Every single one of them was staring straight up. Now, my cattle aren't skittish. They get spooked sometimes, sure, but they're used to coyotes and thunderstorms. They don't group up like that unless something's really got to them. And I mean, really, even then, they don't go quiet. But they were dead still, eyes wide, breathing hard. I could see their sides moving fast in the beam of my flashlight. I looked up too. Just reflex, I guess. Nothing there. Not a cloud, not a bird, not a sound. Just open sky and stars. Clear as you like. I scanned the fence line next. Thought maybe something had gotten in. A dog, or maybe a catamount, though we haven't seen one of those in years. The wire was intact. No paw prints in the dirt. Nothing disturbed. I started walking toward them, slow, not wanting to set off a stampede. I've never seen cattle act like that before, and I've been doing this since I was 20. You could feel the tension coming off them, like they were about to snap and bolt, but they didn't. They stayed locked in that huddle, staring skyward. Halfway across the field, I turned my flashlight off. I don't even know why. Maybe I thought I'd see something better without it. The dark out there isn't like town dark, it's complete. But that night, everything had this weird pale tint. The sky was bright enough from starlight, and the field looked washed out, dim and flat. I looked up again, same stars, same nothing. But then, and I can't explain this part, I got this pressure in my chest. Not pain exactly, more like a weight. Like something was leaning down from above. I crouched without meaning to. My knees just buckled a little. The air felt thicker, not warmer, not colder, just heavier. I thought I was having some kind of episode. I actually slapped my own leg to test if I was awake. And I was. The cows hadn't moved. They were still locked onto the same spot, dead still, eyes wide. One of them, Merle, big red Angus, always the slowest to spook, had foam around his mouth. His legs were shaking. He looked like he was about to collapse. And then, just like that, the weight lifted. Not gradually. Gone, like flicking off a switch. The air felt normal again. My ears popped, like I'd come down from altitude. The cows turned all at once, not bolting, not panicking. They just turned away from the sky one after another like someone had called them from behind. They started drifting apart, walking slow, like whatever had them was just gone. I didn't sleep after that. I just sat out on the porch with Cedar, who'd finally come over to press against my leg like he used to when he was young. He kept staring toward the pasture even after sunrise. Later that morning, I went back out and checked the grass where they'd been grouped up. Ground was dry, no burn marks, no circles, no impressions, just slightly flattened where they'd stood, which made sense. I called the vet to come check them that afternoon. Nothing wrong, no signs of disease, no stress markers, but they didn't eat much for a day or two. Just wandered. Real quiet. I've had weird stuff happen out here before. Insect lights on the horizon, distant humming, that kind of thing. Always figured it was just weather, maybe something military. Dugway's not that far, and they test all kinds of stuff out there. But this was different. The way those cows looked, the way it felt in my chest, the way Cedar wouldn't come outside until it was over. I haven't talked to anyone about it besides Lorna, and she thinks I just dreamed it. Says I was probably sleepwalking again, like I used to in my 30s. But I wasn't. I know I wasn't. The cows don't go near that corner anymore. They avoid it like it's fenced off. Nothing grows differently there. No dead patches. But they won't cross into it, not even when I put feed out. Last week, I caught Cedar standing at the window at 3:30 a.m., staring out across the yard. He doesn't see well anymore, but he stood there stiff as a board, just looking. When I walked over, he growled, this low, unfamiliar rumble I hadn't heard from him in years. I looked out too. Sky was clear, full of stars, nothing moving, nothing there. It started around 9:30 that night, give or take. I was up in the shed behind my brother-in-law's place in northern Arkansas, fiddling with the old transceiver we'd set up on a folding table. Nothing fancy, just a beat-up ICOM rig connected to a dipole we'd strung between two poplars. I was with Ryan, my friend from high school, who still called me Sully, even though no one else did anymore. We'd been doing this kind of thing off and on since college. Never really outgrew it. Some guys hunt, some fish. We chase signals. We didn't broadcast anything crazy, just used the call signs we'd registered, hopped through the 20-meter and 40-meter bands, talked to other hams about weather and gear and local stuff. Sometimes we caught long-distance skip off the ionosphere. That night we weren't getting much. A little chatter out of Tennessee, some guy in Texas with a bad mic. Then we picked up something different. It came in short, a burst. At first I thought it was just bleed from another frequency or someone testing their key, but it came again about 10 seconds later. A clean pulse, about a second long, then another, spaced perfectly, like a metronome, nothing in between. No voice, no ID, just a tone. Ryan leaned toward the speaker. "You hearing that?" "Yeah," I said. "Could be a beacon." We listened for a couple minutes. The signal stayed steady, same pitch, same interval. I wrote down the frequency, 14.312 megahertz, and flipped through a few logs on my laptop to see if it was a known beacon. Nothing came up. That wasn't weird in itself. Plenty of people run unsanctioned tests or looped Morse IDs on homemade rigs. What was weird was how clear it was. No fading. no drift, like it was coming from next door. We figured maybe someone local was screwing around, so Ryan grabbed the mic and keyed up. CQ, CQ, this is K5RTC. Anyone out there on 14.312? Over. We waited. Nothing. Then, exactly 5 seconds later, the same tone came again, but louder. Not just louder in volume, it sounded closer. Like someone turned up the gain on our end. Ryan glanced at me. That's not just me, right? No, I said. That's real. He keyed up again. This is K5RTC. We're hearing a repeating signal on this frequency. If you're transmitting, please ID. Over. Again, 5 seconds later, the same tone, but this time, after the tone, came our own transmission. Repeated back. Word for word, static-laced but clear enough. We just sat there for a few seconds. Ryan kind of smiled at me, half nervous. You playing a recording? No. You got a delay set up? Nope. We tested it. I said something into the mic. Testing, 1, 2, 3. 5 seconds passed. The tone, then testing, 1, 2, 3. My own voice, slightly distorted. Not like it was rebroadcast, more like it had been reconstructed. That's the best way I can explain it. Something off about the cadence, the inflection. We killed the transmitter and just listened for a while. The tone kept coming, every 10 seconds now. Then it stopped, then came back. Then it started playing older things we'd said earlier in the night, conversations from an hour before mashed together in weird order. Snippets like, copy that, we're hearing noise on the wind's picking up here too. Yeah, might be Skip, but I don't know. That last one repeated don't 3 times, stuttered like a glitch. Ryan leaned over and shut the volume down. We sat in silence. Could be someone messing with us, he said, recording us, then playing it back. From where? I asked. The signal's clean. No Doppler, no fade. That's not a bounce. I stepped outside the shed for a second. Everything was dead quiet. The trees didn't even move. There was no wind, no bugs either. That stood out. Normally you hear at least a few cicadas this time of year, even at night, but it was like someone had put a lid over the woods. I walked around the side of the shed with my flashlight. Didn't see anything. The antenna was still up. Coax still tight. When I came back in, Ryan was sitting with his arms crossed, just staring at the radio. It was making a clicking sound now, like a Geiger counter. Not steady, random bursts. I'd never heard anything like that come from that set. He looked at me and said, I don't want to keep listening to this. So we unplugged it. Hard kill. Pulled the power entirely, not just the switch. I even unscrewed the antenna cable from the back, just in case. We sat around for a few minutes drinking warm beer and talking about how it could have been a prank. But neither of us really believed that. We weren't near anyone. His property's isolated, down a gravel road off a gravel road. No cell towers, nearest neighbor's 1.5 miles away. And even if someone had rigged a repeater or SDR set up nearby, it wouldn't explain the delay matching ours so precisely, or the weird way the voices sounded. Just to clear our heads, we took a walk down the tree line with the flashlights. It was past midnight by then. Still no sound outside, not even the creek behind the property, which should have been gurgling from all the recent rain. Then the lights flickered in the shed. We'd left a single bulb on inside. It went dim, then brighter, then dim again, like a power brownout, but the rest of the house stayed lit. Just that one bulb. We both froze. Then the tone started again, from inside the shed. No power, no radio plugged in, just that same single-pitch tone, louder now, coming from somewhere in the room. Not from the table. From the air itself. We didn't go back in. We just backed away slow and walked to the house. Didn't run, didn't speak, just went inside and locked the door. Around 3 a.m. the sound stopped. In the morning we checked everything. The radio was cold, nothing damaged, antenna fine, but the logs on the laptop had been wiped. Not just the session from that night, everything. It wasn't reformatting, just gone. Empty directories. Ryan didn't want to talk about it. He's the kind of guy who jokes about everything, but not this. He packed up his gear and said he was going to take a break from radio for a while. I tried tuning into that same frequency a few nights later from home. Nothing. Dead air. Then, 5 seconds after I said something, a tone. I was working the overnight shift at the downtown airport control tower, the usual graveyard hours from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. It was late April. A cool, clear night with the kind of stillness that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. The city lights below stretched out like a glowing grid, and the airspace was pretty busy considering the time. Plenty of domestic flights coming in and out, plus a few cargo planes on their way somewhere. My name's Jamie. I've been a radar controller for almost 5 years now, so I'm used to weird situations and traffic conflicts, but nothing like what happened that night. Around 2:15 a.m., I noticed a blip on the radar about 50 miles northeast of the airport at roughly 30,000 feet. That's normal enough. Planes cruise around that altitude all the time, but this one didn't match any flight plans or transponder codes. I ran the call sign again. No hits in any databases. I checked the usual flight tracking systems and cross-referenced with other controllers on the network. Nothing. That alone was weird, but not unheard of. Sometimes military aircraft fly under restricted codes or private jets operate without squawk transponders for security reasons. But then I looked closer. The thing was just hovering, not cruising, not moving laterally, just sitting at 30,000 feet, dead still. That didn't sit right with me. I radioed the pilots of a nearby flight, a commercial jet heading inbound from Boston, and asked if they saw anything out the window. The captain replied back, voice a little shaky, saying he thought he saw a faint light way above them, but nothing solid. I couldn't get any more from him. I kept watching the blip, waiting for it to move or at least blink a code, but it stayed put. After a few minutes, it started climbing. Slowly at first, maybe a few hundred feet per minute, but then faster. The vertical speed picked up, and the blip shot straight up, like it was heading to space. I double-checked everything to make sure it wasn't a glitch. The radar was working fine. I cross-checked with a secondary system at a neighboring tower. Both showed the same thing. As it climbed, it kept a perfectly straight line, no wobbling or course adjustments, no slowing down. I watched as it passed 35,000 feet, 40,000, and then it vanished. No signals, no transponder code, just gone. I tried to contact other regional centers, but no one else had anything on their scopes matching it. I kept reviewing the radar tape later, trying to catch a detail I might have missed, but the blip was clean. No echoes, no breakdowns, no interference. That's the official part. What I can't explain is what happened afterward. I was still in the tower, logging the event and filing the report. I stepped out on the observation deck for a breath of fresh air. The night was quiet, the city's hum distant but steady. I looked up. The sky was clear, but there was this odd glow, kind of a pale bluish sheen, right where the blip had disappeared. It didn't last long, maybe a few seconds, but it felt wrong, like the air had shifted around me. When I turned back inside, I found my radio scanner buzzing with static, then a faint, low humming sound underneath it. It wasn't coming from the equipment. I could feel it in my chest, like a vibration. I glanced around. No one else in the tower was reacting. I checked the radio again. The hum stopped. I shrugged it off, finished my paperwork, and got ready to clock out. But as I walked toward the break room, the lights flickered. Just once, but enough to make me pause. I'm used to old buildings and electrical quirks, but the timing was strange. Outside the tower windows, the city looked normal. No flashes, no sirens, no emergency vehicles. I stepped outside again, hoping the weird energy would clear. Instead, the humming came back, softer now, and there was a strange metallic scent in the air, like ozone but mixed with something else in place. I didn't want to stick around, so I left and drove home. The rest of the night was quiet. I checked the news the next morning. No reports of strange lights or aircraft, no military alerts, nothing. The radar logs were inconclusive in the official report. A few days later, I heard from a buddy at the FAA. He said there'd been some chatter about a ghost target in the system, but nothing confirmed. I kept thinking about that light in the sky, the way the blip climbed straight up, and that humming in the tower. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't like any aircraft I've ever tracked. I was sitting on the wooden bench just off the gravel path that winds through the east side of Cedar Ridge Park, binoculars in hand. That morning was unusually crisp for late spring. Fog hung low over the valley, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth and pine. I like coming out early before the park fills up to watch the birds. It's the only time I get to feel like the world slows down a little. My dog, a lanky mutt named Juno, was curled up at my feet, half asleep but alert enough to jump up if anything interesting showed itself. She doesn't care much about birds, but she likes being outside, same as me. I was scanning the treetops on the ridge about a mile away, focusing on a pair of red-tailed hawks I'd spotted the day before. The binoculars are nothing fancy, just a second-hand pair I grabbed at a yard sale last summer, but they do the job. Suddenly, something caught the light behind the hill. I blinked and refocused. It was a disc-shaped object, hovering maybe 200 yards above the tree line, reflecting the weak sunlight like a mirror. It was perfectly still, not moving with any wind or air currents I could see. I held the binoculars tight, trying to get a better look, but then it blinked out, vanishing like a light switch had been flipped off. The sky behind the hill was clear. No clouds or anything to obscure it. I lowered the binoculars slowly, scanning the ridge with my naked eyes. Nothing. No shape, no gleam, no movement. I called Juno to heel, more out of instinct than anything, and stood up, squinting toward the spot where it had been. The fog was thinning now, but the hill looked exactly the same as always, just trees, rocks, and a scattering of wildflowers. I shook my head, telling myself I must have caught a reflection from something else, maybe a piece of metal or an old hunting blind with a reflective tarp. But nothing like that had ever been there before, and I know those hills pretty well. I looked back down the path. No one else was around. The park was quiet, except for the soft rustling of leaves and Juno's nails clicking on the wooden bench. The whole thing lasted maybe 10 seconds from the moment I saw the glint to when it disappeared. After that, I kept looking, binoculars glued to my eyes, but I didn't see anything else unusual. The birds were still there, going about their morning, and the ridge was just a ridge. I packed up and headed home, feeling a little off, but not exactly scared, more like confused. That afternoon, I found a few more strange things. My phone battery had drained to 0, even though I hadn't used it much. The last message log showed the screen had been active at the exact moment I saw the disk, but I don't remember checking it. When I mentioned it to my neighbor, a retired forest ranger named Ellie, she smiled and said sometimes the woods and hills play tricks on us. Reflections, light, the way the brain fills in gaps, she said. But her eyes didn't look quite convinced. I haven't been back to that spot yet. Juno seems fine with it, just eager for walks and treats. Me, I keep wondering if I actually saw something or if my mind just twisted the morning's light into something strange. Either way, I keep the binoculars on the shelf by the door, just in case. I was flying from Bend to Missoula, late afternoon, early spring. It was a Cessna 182 I'd rented out of Printaville, nothing fancy, older but solid. I'd made the trip a dozen times before, usually to see my brother and his kids. Weather was decent, a little choppy near John Day, but otherwise clear skies and steady air. I took off around 5:10 p.m., sun still high, but low enough that everything had that soft, golden tint to it. Visibility was great. You could see the Cascades way off to the west, snow still heavy on the peaks. I leveled out at 9,500 feet and held course. About 40 minutes in, I noticed something off to my right. At first, I thought it was just a glint, sunlight bouncing off another plane, maybe higher altitude. But there weren't any traffic advisories. Nothing showed on the Garmin, and I wasn't on a busy corridor anyway. It looked like a metallic sphere. Not huge, maybe 6 or 7 feet across. It was hard to tell. No wings, no exhaust, no markings. Just smooth, reflective, and totally silent. I watched it for a solid 10 seconds before realizing it was moving, slowly but definitely keeping pace. I called in on the radio. Bozeman Center, November 652 Charlie, do you have traffic at my 2 o'clock, same altitude? They came back a moment later. Negative 2 Charlie, no traffic in your vicinity. I didn't say anything else. Just watched it. The thing was maybe 300 yards out, off my right wingtip. It didn't bob or tilt like a drone, just hovered in place. Matched my heading exactly. I tried banking slightly left, just a minor correction. The sphere adjusted immediately. I pulled the yoke back a little, gained about 100 feet. It climbed with me, perfectly. It wasn't aggressive, didn't zip in or anything, just Tracked. I can't really explain how wrong that felt. It stayed with me for 18 minutes. I know because I glanced at the dash clock constantly. I kept expecting it to peel away or drop back, but it didn't. Just hovered, steady, never wobbling. I grabbed my phone, tried to get a picture. The second I pulled it up, the object drifted slightly backward, like it could tell. When I aimed the camera out the window, all I caught was sky glare. Then it stopped pacing me. It paused midair, maybe 2 body lengths behind and to the right, held there for a second, then shot upward. Not at an angle. Straight up, like if you tied a string to it and yanked it into the sky. No acceleration curve. Just gone. I didn't hear anything. Not even a whoosh. I stared out the window for a long time. I didn't even think to contact the tower again. When I landed at Missoula, I did the usual post-flight checks, but my hands were shaking. I didn't say anything to the guy at the hangar, just signed the log and went to the rental car. Later that night, I checked flight radar in case there were any weird military operations. Nothing. The next day, I called the airport in Prineville, asked if anyone had reported drone activity along that corridor. The guy said no. Asked if I'd seen anything interesting. I said no, I haven't seen it again. But now every time I'm up, I look. I work as a park ranger out in the Cascades at this place called Cedar Ridge Preserve. It's not a huge park or anything, but it's mostly untouched forest, a few hiking trails, and a couple of remote campsites. The area is quiet, especially once you get a few miles from the main parking lot. My shifts usually have me checking in on trails, making sure no one's doing anything stupid, that kind of thing. One of my jobs is to monitor a set of motion sensor cameras we've got set up along some of the less traveled trails. The cameras mostly catch wildlife, deer, raccoons, the occasional elk. Every once in a while, hikers or campers show up on them too. The footage is mostly boring. I watch it on a laptop in the little ranger station, usually late in the evening or early morning, when there's less to do out in the field. A few weeks ago, I was looking over the footage from Trail 7, which runs along a ridge and then drops down into a thick grove of old firs. That section's not popular. Hardly anyone takes it because the terrain gets rough and cell service is non-existent. I was scrolling through a batch of video clips from the previous day when something caught my eye. Around 7:15 p.m., just as the sun was setting, the camera caught a figure standing in a clearing about 20 feet from the lens. The strange thing was, the figure wasn't moving at all, not like someone standing still or waiting. It was unnaturally motionless, like a statue. I rewound the clip and watched it a few times. The figure was about 6 feet tall, slender, but there were no clear details. No clothing folds, no hair, nothing that looked familiar. It was smooth, like the surface of a polished stone or plastic. No visible features or texture. The shape was vaguely human, but too smooth and featureless to be a person in a suit or even a jacket. Its arms hung straight down at its sides, and it didn't blink or shift its weight. The clip was only 10 seconds long before the motion sensor stopped recording. I thought maybe it was someone standing still, and the sensor just cut off. So I went back through the previous footage from that camera, and maybe it caught the figure approaching or leaving. There was nothing. No footprints or animals in the frames before or after. The trail leading into the clearing was empty. The usual forest sounds were missing too. No birds, no wind rustling the leaves. The whole 10-second clip had this eerie silence. That night, I went back out to the clearing in person. The spot was real. Just like on the footage, a small patch of open ground surrounded by thick fir trees. The dirt was soft from a recent rain, and I looked around for tracks. There were prints from deer and squirrels, but no human footprints, no tire marks, nothing odd. I kept checking the footage every day after that. 2 more nights later, the camera caught the same figure at almost the same time, standing in roughly the same spot. It didn't move, didn't blink, didn't shift in any way. Then it vanished. When I say vanished, I mean it was there in one frame, and then the very next frame, it was gone. No blur, no fading, no leaving the frame, just completely disappeared. I checked the frame before and after several times. Nothing showed any sign of movement leading up to the disappearance. The timestamp was steady, no glitching. The thing is, the footage is grainy, Low res, no details, just a blurry silhouette. But that smoothness was there, like the figure was something not quite solid. I asked a coworker to look at the clip and see if they noticed anything. He said it looked like a person in a morph suit or some kind of uniform, but that didn't explain the sudden disappearance. At this point, I started feeling weird about the whole thing. It wasn't just the figure, it was the way the forest felt whenever I went near that clearing. Quiet in a way that wasn't normal, like the trees were holding their breath. One evening, I decided to hike the trail about an hour before sunset and set up to watch the spot myself. I brought my dog, Sadie, a border collie mix who's usually calm but alert. We got to the clearing around 6:30 p.m. and sat down on a fallen log nearby. At first, nothing happened. Sadie sniffed around, ears perked, but she didn't bark or act nervous. The forest was still, the kind of still that's heavy, like everything's waiting for something. Then, just as the sun was dipping below the horizon, I saw it. A shape standing at the far edge of the clearing, exactly where the camera had caught it. The same smooth, featureless silhouette, motionless, blending into the dusk shadows. I didn't move. Sadie tensed beside me, her hackles rising. The figure just stood there, watching. There was no sense of hostility, but something about it felt off. It didn't breathe or blink, didn't shift its stance. After about 5 minutes, the figure simply disappeared. One moment it was there, the next, nothing but empty air. No sound, no movement. Sadie let out a low growl, and I stood up, heart pounding. We didn't stay long after that. I've kept an eye on the trail cameras since then. The figure hasn't come back, at least not that I've seen. But sometimes when I'm walking through the woods near that clearing, I get this feeling like I'm being watched. Not by an animal or a person, but something else. Something that's not quite there. I don't know what it was, and I don't expect to. It's just a part of the forest now, a quiet presence I can't explain. I work for a small weather station just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. Nothing fancy, mostly gathering data from our weather balloons and sending reports to the university and some local agencies. The station is in a pretty remote spot, on a plateau surrounded by forest and desert. Last September, I was on the late afternoon shift, which means prepping the balloons for release just before dusk, then tracking them as they float up through the atmosphere. That day, I was alone at the station except for my dog, Juno. She's a border collie mix, smart as hell, and usually sticks close by. The weather was clear, a bit chilly, with that dry desert air that feels crisp but doesn't bite like snow. The sun was starting to drop low behind the San Francisco peaks, turning the sky orange and purple. I launched the balloon around 6:10 p.m., like I always do. It's one of those big latex ones, filled with helium, with a small package attached beneath it. The camera and some sensors recording temperature, pressure, humidity, and sending it back to us in real time. The balloon floats up slowly, sometimes going as high as 30 kilometers before bursting and falling back. As usual, I switched on the receiver and the monitor showing the camera's live feed. The image was grainy, black and white, but it gave a decent look at what the balloon was passing over. I expected to see the dark outline of the forest and patches of desert moving beneath it as it rose. But then something caught my eye. At about 5,000 meters altitude, roughly 3 kilometers above the ground, there was this dark shape moving alongside the balloon, matching its altitude and speed almost perfectly. At first, I thought it was a bird, maybe a hawk or an eagle, since they sometimes fly high in those parts. But the shape didn't look right. It was too big, too solid looking, and it didn't flap wings or change direction erratically. It just paced the balloon, staying about 200 meters away horizontally, sliding along the same course. I kept watching. Juno sat nearby, eyes fixed on me, probably sensing my distraction. Minutes passed. 10 minutes. 15. The object never veered off. No change in altitude, no speed change. It just glided beside the balloon, moving steadily over the darkening landscape below. I called my supervisor Mark on the radio, told him what I was seeing, and asked if he could check from the other station a few miles east. He said he wasn't getting any signals or anything unusual on their equipment. I thought maybe it was just something that only showed up on the camera feed. At 20 minutes, The object suddenly accelerated straight up. It moved fast, faster than anything I'd seen in the sky around there. The balloon camera's view went fuzzy as the distance grew. The object disappeared into the upper atmosphere in seconds, too quickly to track beyond a certain point. The balloon kept rising until it popped as expected, and I watched the sensors report data all the way to the burst. Nothing else showed up on the feed after the object vanished. That night, back at the station, I downloaded all the footage and data. When I replayed the video on my laptop, the object was there, pacing right alongside the balloon, clearly visible as a dark oval shape against the sky. No wings, no lights, just moving smoothly. But the weird thing is, the GPS data from the balloon didn't show any disturbances. Nothing on radar scans from nearby stations. I ran the data through every filter and software we have, and nothing explained it. I showed the video to Mark the next day. He shrugged and said maybe it was a rare weather phenomenon, a trick of light or shadow, but neither of us could find a solid explanation. Since then, I've watched every balloon launch closely, hoping to catch something similar. Nothing. Just the usual slow rise, pop, and data dump. Sometimes I think about how precise that thing was, matching the balloon's altitude and speed for so long without making a sound or a visible signature beyond what the camera caught, and how suddenly it shot straight up, faster than anything I've ever seen. Juno still likes to follow me out to the launch site, especially at dusk. She stares into the sky more than usual, like she remembers something I don't. I keep the footage saved, but I don't show it around. Most people at the station think I'm nuts when I mention it, and honestly, I'm not sure what I saw either. I was out flying my drone just after sunset one Thursday, down near the edge of town where the farms start thinning out and the trees get patchy. The sky was clear, but those clouds that sometimes stick around after the sun goes down were hovering low, stretching out like a thin, white blanket. Not the kind you'd expect to block the view completely, but enough to catch the last light and glow faintly. I'd been practicing some new maneuvers, trying to get smoother with the controls, and figured I'd push it a little farther out than usual. My drone, a DJI Mavic Pro I'd had for about a year, has a decent range, and I was feeling confident. The spot I picked was just off a quiet gravel road, with an old barn nearby and a field beyond that where the corn had already been harvested. I like this place because it's open enough for good flying, but secluded enough that I don't have to worry about people. I was about 500 or 600 feet out, flying level, when I noticed something odd in the sky ahead. At first, it was just a small glint, like a shard of metal catching what little light was left. The clouds around it were thin and wispy, but that glint stood out sharp and bright, reflecting a cold, hard light. It didn't look like a plane, no blinking lights or moving parts, and it wasn't a star or satellite either. It was way too low for that. Curious, I pushed the drone closer. The controller showed the signal was solid, video feed crisp, no lag. I moved it slowly toward the object, wanting to get a better look. The glint didn't change shape or move. It just hovered, suspended among the clouds, perfectly still. The drone's camera angle adjusted automatically, giving me a clearer shot, but the object stayed vague, almost like a reflective surface curved in a way that distorted the clouds behind it. That's when the controls started acting up. The drone wouldn't respond smoothly. Commands to move left or right were delayed or ignored. I tried pulling back, but it kept drifting forward toward the object. The signal strength dropped from full bars to 2, then 1. The feed got choppy, the image breaking up with static lines and pixelation. I hit the return to home button, hoping it would override the interference. The drone lurched, but instead of turning back, it seemed to hover in place, stuck. The screen flashed a warning, signal lost. I could see the last frame before the feed cut out entirely. That gleaming shape, impossible to pin down, surrounded by shifting clouds. The screen went black, and the signal stayed dead for a solid 30 seconds. I was standing there, hands frozen over the controller, staring up at the clouds, trying to find that object, but there was nothing. Just the quiet field and an empty sky. Then out of nowhere, the video feed blinked back on. The drone was nowhere near the glint anymore. The screen showed it drifting slowly back over the cornfield, but the video was scrambled. Colors distorted, static flickering across the image, shapes blurred and twisting like a bad TV signal. I tried switching channels, resetting the connection, but the distortion stayed. The drone was back in range. Its GPS signal showed a path that didn't make any sense. The recorded video file was corrupted too. Parts missing, moments skipped, a few seconds of what looked like the glint again, but in such low quality that it was impossible to tell. I landed the drone as quickly as I could. When I picked it up, I noticed the camera lens had a thin, misty film over it, like condensation, even though it was dry outside. I wiped it off with my sleeve, but it came back after a few minutes. That night, I went through the footage on my laptop. The normal parts were fine, clear sky, field, barn, but that sequence near the glint was mangled. No sound, just static and flashes of weird shapes I couldn't identify. I tried running the files through recovery software, but got nowhere. The next day, I went back to the field to check for anything strange on the ground. No footprints, no debris, nothing unusual. The barn looked the same. Even the spot where I lost signal was just empty sky and normal clouds. Later, a few friends who drone a lot told me they'd never heard of interference like that, especially out in the country where there's minimal radio traffic. One suggested maybe a weather balloon or some kind of reflective kite, but I checked around. No balloons scheduled and nothing visible on the ground. Weeks passed, and the incident felt more like a weird glitch, except I can't explain the sudden loss and return of control, or the object's total disappearance from the sky. Sometimes when I'm flying now, I get this feeling like something's watching, just beyond the edge of the feed. And every once in a while, when it's the sun, just right at dusk, I swear I see that same glint. But when I look closer, there's never anything there. We were at a little campground near Lake Ouachita, first week of October. Not peak season, so it was quiet. Just a handful of other RVs scattered along the loop, mostly older couples. Our spot was tucked back, with the lake maybe 50 yards downhill through some pines and brush. No hookups, dry camping, just us, the dog, and a small campfire if we wanted one. We got there on a Friday afternoon. Weather was decent, high 60s during the day, dropped into the 40s at night. I'd brought my old Jayco pop-up and parked it near the back edge of the site, facing the trees. Our lab mix, Tiller, settled in fast. He loves the woods, always sniffing around like he's working security detail. That second night was when it happened. Saturday. We'd grilled hot dogs, had a couple beers, and turned in early, maybe 9:30. I was lying on the fold-out bed, scrolling through my phone while Chelsea read by headlamp. We didn't have much signal out there, just a couple bars if I stood by the window. Then everything blinked off. No click, no dimming, just instant dead. Her headlamp, my phone, the little LED reading light on the ceiling, all of it, all at once. I sat up and asked if she'd hit something by accident. She said no, and I could hear the confusion in her voice. I reached for my phone again, wouldn't even light up, dead like it hadn't been charged in days. Same with the backup flashlight we kept near the door. Tiller started whining, not barking, whining. Low, restless sound, pacing between the door and the window like he didn't know where to look. Chelsea zipped up her jacket and went to open the door. I followed her out and we stepped down onto the gravel. It was almost totally quiet. Not silent, there were still crickets I think, but something felt flattened. Like all the usual nighttime layers were stripped out. No distant frogs from the lake, no rustling in the brush, just this odd still hush. Then we saw the lights. They were above the tree line, maybe 100 yards off, moving slow. Not plain slow, slower. Like someone dragging a spoon through syrup. 3 of them. Bright white, but not harsh. More like a distant floodlight through fog, except there was no fog. The lights stayed level with each other, spaced out in a triangle. No blinking, no color change. Just this steady drift across the sky. We stood there watching, not speaking. Tiller had sat down by then, but he was trembling. I tried my phone again, still nothing. Chelsea reached for hers, same result. The lights moved behind a clump of taller pines, disappeared for a second, then reappeared farther along like they were making a shallow arc over the lake. I remember thinking it looked way too low for any kind of plane, and too slow. There was no engine sound, no hum, nothing. After maybe 30 seconds, the lights stopped. They just hung there. Chelsea whispered, "Go get the camera." I nodded and climbed back into the Jayco, rummaging for the little cannon we keep in the side cabinet. It's nothing fancy, just a point and shoot, but it's digital, and I knew the battery had been charged before we left. I brought it out, pointed it toward the lights, hit the power button, nothing. Completely dead. Tried it again, then flipped open the battery cover to make sure it hadn't somehow come loose. Everything was in place. It just wouldn't turn on. That's when we noticed the RV was completely dark. Even when we weren't using any systems, there's always a faint glow from the fridge panel or the battery monitor. Those were out too. No power. And we weren't plugged in, but the house battery was full when we parked. It should have been enough to keep basics running all weekend. Chelsea stepped back toward the door and reached inside to feel for the switch panel. She flipped a few. Nothing. Tiller was whining again. I don't know how long we stood there. The lights didn't move, didn't wobble or change color, just hung in place like they were watching us, though that sounds stupid to say. Then they started moving again. Not away. Straight up. Slowly at first, still no sound, then a little faster. In maybe 5 seconds, they were higher than the trees, then higher than the ridge. Another 10 seconds, and they were just tiny points above the lake. Then they blinked out, one at a time. Left, right, center, like someone flipping off switches. As soon as the last one disappeared, the crickets came back. I didn't notice it until that moment, but it was like someone had turned the world back on. The breeze kicked up again. A branch cracked somewhere off in the woods. Tiller stood and stretched, then walked to the water bowl like nothing happened. Chelsea went inside and tried the overhead light again. It flicked on. Dim at first, then back to normal. My phone buzzed with a delayed notification, and the cannon powered on like nothing had ever been wrong. Everything was working again. I checked the house battery display, 95%. Same as the day before. I checked the fuses, the inverter, everything. Nothing tripped, nothing fried. Chelsea didn't want to stay another night, and honestly, I didn't either. We packed up in the morning and drove out. I told the ranger at the gate that we'd had an equipment issue and cut the weekend short. He didn't ask questions. Back home, I charged the cannon fully and tried taking a few test shots. Worked fine, no issues. I went to plug my phone in and found it at 67%, exactly where it had been before it died. It wasn't like the battery had drained, it just shut off. Same with the RV systems. I even took it to a buddy who does repairs, had him test the battery and solar controller. All clean. No faults. We haven't been back to that campground since. Tiller still gets jittery around flashlights, which he never did before. Chelsea keeps the camera in a drawer now and hasn't touched it since. The power went out around 11:30 that night. I was already in bed, but the whole house suddenly went dark, like someone flipped a switch. No warning or flicker, just black. I checked my phone, no signal. Figured it was a local outage. The wind had picked up outside, trees were creaking, but no storm or rain. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and went downstairs to check the fuse box, thinking maybe a breaker tripped. Everything looked fine. I thought about going outside to see if my neighbors had power, but it was cold and quiet. My dog, Finley, a medium-sized terrier mix with a gray muzzle, was restless, pacing near the door. We stayed inside, windows shut tight. The weird part started when I went to check the security cameras. I have a system with 2 cameras on the back of the house, mostly to keep an eye on the yard and driveway. Usually, I check the footage from my phone app, but the app was offline because of the power and internet outage. When power came back around 1:15 a.m., I got back on my phone to check the cameras. The living room lights flickered on, the fridge hummed back to life, and my phone finally showed the camera feed. That's when I saw it. The video showed the yard starting at 11:30 p.m., the moment the power cut out. It was grainy, low-light black and white, but you could make out shapes. The wooden fence, the tall spruce tree near the corner, the patch of grass where Finley likes to dig. Then, about 20 seconds into the footage, a slow, smooth shape appeared from the right side of the frame. It hovered just above the treetops, gliding silently across the yard. It looked like some kind of craft, maybe a rounded, slightly elongated silhouette with soft edges, no sharp lines or visible wings. It didn't shine or flash any lights. It was just there, moving quietly and deliberately, about 10 feet above the grass, drifting toward the left side of the frame. The thing moved too smoothly, like it was floating in water, and made no sound at all. Finley was on the porch, barking once or twice, but no other noises. What got me was how slow and deliberate it was, like it was surveying or searching. The footage showed it drifting for about 45 seconds before it vanished past the camera's edge. But then, right after that, the footage turned to static and glitching. The video became corrupted, skipping in and out, freezing on static lines, the image flickering like a broken TV signal. No matter what I tried, I couldn't recover or view any of the footage past that point. The file was damaged, unreadable. I went outside right away, flashlight in hand, hoping to find some sign the thing had actually been there. The yard looked normal. No footprints, no scorch marks, no broken branches. Finley circled a few times, but didn't dig or sniff anything unusual. I checked the rest of the house's electronics. Nothing was broken or acting weird aside from the power outage itself. The next morning, I asked a neighbor if they'd lost power too. They said yes, but they didn't notice anything strange outside. I didn't mention the footage. Over the next week, I kept watching the camera feed whenever I could. The cameras stayed online normally, but that night's footage was the only one that showed the weird shape. Sometimes I wondered if it was some kind of drone or a weather balloon, but nothing fit. No blinking lights or noise, no equipment, no explanation. A few nights later, the power went out again, same time, same pattern, but the camera didn't capture anything unusual, just the yard in darkness until the power came back. I started feeling on edge in my own backyard, like something was watching from the trees. Finley didn't like it either. He'd growl softly sometimes at the edges of the yard, staring into the dark. One night, I sat on the back porch late, watching the treetops. The air was cold and still. I thought I saw a faint glow far off, moving slowly behind the trees, but when I blinked, it was gone. No flashes, no sounds, just a feeling that something was there, drifting somewhere out of sight. I don't know what it was or why the footage broke right after it appeared. The whole thing keeps me up sometimes, thinking about what else might have been caught or what might have been lost. I was doing a routine patrol near the southern boundary of Cedar Ridge Park just before dusk. It was late April, the air still holding a cool dampness from an earlier rain, and the trail was muddy enough to leave clear prints. I'd been with the Park Service for a few years by then, and I was used to weird stuff. Broken branches, odd sounds, the usual evidence of animals or careless visitors. But that night, I found something I still can't explain. I was hiking the Ridge Trail, heading back toward the ranger station after checking the old fire lookout tower. My dog, Luna, was with me. She's a German Shepherd mix, mostly calm but alert, and she kept sniffing around, poking through wet leaves and sniffing at logs like usual. We'd been out for maybe 2 hours, and the fading light was starting to make the woods feel colder than it should for April. About halfway down the slope, the trail dipped near a small muddy clearing by the creek. That's when I saw the prints. They were huge. Too big to be from any animal I'd ever seen in the park, and definitely not human. I stopped, knelt down, and looked closely. The tracks were circular, like perfect rings pressed into the mud. Each one was maybe 1.5 feet across, and they formed concentric circles, like ripples in water, only they were carved into the ground. The pattern was consistent for about 6 steps, then vanished near a clump of bushes. There was no drag mark, no sign of a foot or paw lifting. Just those perfect round impressions. The spacing between the prints was too long for a person or deer walking. Luna growled softly beside me and stared into the bushes, ears pricked. She didn't move forward, just stayed frozen, watching. I pulled out my flashlight and scanned the underbrush, but the woods looked normal. No branches broken, no other footprints, nothing that suggested what made the prints. It felt like something had just hovered above the mud and pressed down in a pattern. I checked the surrounding area for clues. No tire tracks, no boot prints, no animal tracks intersecting or nearby. The mud was soft enough to catch everything, but these were the only prints. I tried to shake off the weird feeling and figured maybe it was some prank, local kids messing around, using some kind of stencil or mold. But why 6 perfect, evenly spaced circles and then nothing? I called it in over the radio to the station. The dispatcher told me to collect photos and samples if I could. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, making sure to get the size by placing my glove beside a print. Luna stayed close, clearly unsettled. We stayed by the clearing for another 20 minutes. That's when I noticed something else. The forest around us felt quieter than normal. No birds, no frogs, no crickets. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful but tense, like the woods were holding their breath. Then I heard a faint sound, not like wind, more like a low hum or vibration coming from the direction of the prints. It wasn't steady, it pulsed slowly, almost rhythmic. I looked around, trying to figure out if it was machinery or power lines nearby, but there was nothing but forest in the creek. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination or something natural, but Luna's hackles were up again, and she was growling softly at the same spot. I didn't want to push it, so I grabbed her leash and started back toward the trail. On the way out, I glanced over my shoulder a few times. The prints stayed exactly where they were, undisturbed by wind or rain. And that humming sound seemed to fade with distance, but never fully disappeared until we got to the station. Later that night, after I'd filed the report and was about to turn in, I looked at the photos again. The edges of the prints looked too precise, like they'd been made by a perfect mold or machine, not a foot or paw. But if that was true, why no one was around? No vehicle tracks, no tools left behind. I asked some of the other rangers if they'd seen anything like it before. Most said no, though one older guy mentioned a story about strange lights people reported decades ago near the park. But no official reports ever came through. Over the next few days, I checked the clearing several times. No new prints, no signs of people or animals. The ground slowly dried and the prints faded, but the mystery stayed with me. Sometimes at night, when I'm alone in the station, I swear I can hear that same faint hum, the one I heard by the prints. Just barely there, like something waiting out in the dark woods beyond the trees. Luna never reacts to it anymore, but I still notice her ears twitch. I don't know what made those tracks, or why it left no trace beyond those perfect circles in the mud. The whole thing felt like a quiet reminder that there are things out there I just don't understand. I worked overnights at a 24-hour pharmacy just outside St. Louis, running the front register and stocking shelves while the pharmacist handled the back. Quiet job, mostly uneventful. A lot of old folks picking up meds at weird hours. A few sketchy characters looking for cold medicine we didn't sell anymore, stuff like that. It started sometime in January. I noticed this man across the street around 2:30 in the morning, just standing there. At first, I thought he was waiting for a ride. He was by the edge of the parking lot for the self-storage place, under one of those old sodium street lamps. He was tall, maybe 6 feet or more, wearing a heavy coat and a hat with the brim pulled low. Could have been anyone, really. He wasn't doing anything, not pacing or looking at his phone, just standing, facing our store. I remember watching him from behind the counter for a few minutes before I got distracted by a customer. When I looked again, he was gone. Didn't think much of it. Then I saw him again the next night. Same time, same place. He didn't move, didn't smoke, didn't shift his weight or check his watch. I watched him for almost 10 minutes straight. I'd ring someone up, glance over, and he'd be in the exact same spot, same posture. After a while, I went to the front doors and peeked out just to get a better look. I didn't step outside. It was freezing. But I stood there a minute, trying to figure out if he was maybe waiting for someone inside the storage lot. He wasn't. The gate was shut and locked, and the office there had been closed for hours. I remember feeling weird about it, but telling myself he was probably just homeless. Maybe sleeping nearby and killing time. Third night, he was back again. That's when I brought it up to Mark, the pharmacist I worked with. I said something like, "You ever notice that guy across the street?" and pointed out the window. Mark looked and said, "What guy?" I told him he was right there, under the street lamp, and Mark squinted a bit and said, "I don't see anyone." I figured the angle was wrong, or maybe the guy had just walked off, so I let it go. But the next night, I saw him again. This time I walked to the doors and opened one just enough to lean out and get a better view. The cold hit hard, but I stood there for a minute, watching him. Same coat, same stance, facing us. I called out, not yelling, just a loud, "Hey!" No response. He didn't even flinch. I went back inside, locked up, and stood there for a while, just watching him through the glass. Eventually, I had to get back to stalking, and when I looked again 10 minutes later, he was gone. This went on for about a week. Every night, same time, same spot. I started to feel uneasy about it. Not scared exactly, just tense, like I was being watched even when I wasn't looking at him. I started checking the cameras. We had a dome cam pointed out the front doors and one angled toward the parking lot, both feeding to a cheap monitor in the manager's office. I scrolled through the recordings from the nights I remembered seeing him. Nothing. No movement across the street. No figure under the light. At first, I thought maybe the cameras didn't catch that far. But I tested it. Went out to the spot during my break and waved my arms around. Showed up fine on playback, so the feed should have shown him, but it didn't. I even saved a few clips and brought them in the next night, side by side with the times I'd seen the guy. On my phone, he was there, plain as day. On the store's cameras, the space was empty. That freaked me out. I started bringing my phone out and taking pictures through the window when I saw him. A couple were blurry or too dark, but 2 came out okay. I showed them to Mark, and he kind of shrugged and said, "Could be anything. Might just be a shadow." He clearly didn't want to get into it. The last night I saw him was a Thursday. It had snowed a bit earlier in the evening, not much, just a dusting, and by 2:30 the sidewalks were pretty icy. I'd been checking the front window every few minutes out of habit, and sure enough, he was there again. Only this time he was closer, not across the street anymore, but right at the edge of our lot. Still under the light, still not moving. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There weren't any footprints in the snow. I mean, none. The sidewalk between the street and where he stood was untouched. No tracks leading in, no marks behind him, just smooth snow all the way to the curb. I stared for a long time, trying to make sense of it. I opened the door again, leaned out, and shouted a little louder this time. "Hey, you okay?" Same deal, no reaction. I stayed by the door, hand on the lock. My heart was pounding, and I didn't really know why. He hadn't done anything, but the whole thing felt wrong. After about 30 seconds, I shut the door and went to the back office to check the monitors. Nothing. That spot was just empty black and white asphalt on the screen. I ran back to the front and he was still there. Didn't even look like he'd shifted a centimeter. I took a photo with my phone again, then zoomed in. His face wasn't visible. Shadow from the hat, maybe. But the longer I stared, the more I thought there wasn't a face at all. Just darkness under the brim. Not a shadow, more like nothing. No features, no shine, not even the reflection off skin. I backed away and went into the back room, locked the door, and waited. Didn't tell Mark, I didn't know how to even explain it. I went back to the window around 3:15. He was gone. And that was it. He never showed up again. I kept looking for a while, checked the cameras, checked the lot, even walked across the street once during the day to see if there were any signs someone had been there. Cigarette butts, trash, anything. Nothing. I've still got the photo. It's grainy and dark, and most people I've shown it to just say it's probably a coat rack or something. But I know what I saw. I worked overnights at a 24-hour pharmacy just outside St. Louis, running the front register and stocking shelves while the pharmacist handled the back. Quiet job, mostly uneventful. A lot of old folks picking up meds at weird hours. A few sketchy characters looking for cold medicine we didn't sell anymore, stuff like that. It started sometime in January. I noticed this man across the street around 2:30 in the morning, just standing there. At first, I thought he was waiting for a ride. He was by the edge of the parking lot for the self-storage place, under one of those old sodium street lamps. He was tall, maybe 6 feet or more, wearing a heavy coat and a hat with the brim pulled low. Could have been anyone, really. He wasn't doing anything, not pacing or looking at his phone, just standing, facing our store. I remember watching him from behind the counter for a few minutes before I got distracted by a customer. When I looked again, he was gone. Didn't think much of it. Then I saw him again the next night. Same time, same place. He didn't move, didn't smoke, didn't shift his weight or check his watch. I watched him for almost 10 minutes straight. I'd ring someone up, glance over, and he'd be in the exact same spot, same posture. After a while, I went to the front doors and peeked out just to get a better look. I didn't step outside. It was freezing. But I stood there a minute, trying to figure out if he was maybe waiting for someone inside the storage lot. He wasn't. The gate was shut and locked, and the office there had been closed for hours. I remember feeling weird about it, but telling myself he was probably just homeless, maybe sleeping nearby and killing time. Third night, he was back again. That's when I brought it up to Mark, the pharmacist I worked with. I said something like, "You ever notice that guy across the street?" and pointed out the window. Mark looked and said, "What guy?" I told him he was right there, under the street lamp, and Mark squinted a bit and said, "I don't see anyone." I figured the angle was wrong, or maybe the guy had just walked off, so I let it go. But the next night, I saw him again. This time I walked to the doors and opened one just enough to lean out and get a better view. The cold hit hard, but I stood there for a minute, watching him. Same coat, same stance, facing us. I called out, not yelling, just a loud, "Hey!" No response. He didn't even flinch. I went back inside, locked up, and stood there for a while, just watching him through the glass. Eventually, I had to get back to stalking, and when I looked again 10 minutes later, he was gone. This went on for about a week. Every night, same time, same spot. I started to feel uneasy about it. Not scared exactly, just tense, like I was being watched even when I wasn't looking at him. I started checking the cameras. We had a dome cam pointed out the front doors and one angled toward the parking lot, both feeding to a cheap monitor in the manager's office. I scrolled through the recordings from the nights I remembered seeing him. Nothing. No movement across the street. No figure under the light. At first, I thought maybe the cameras didn't catch that far. But I tested it. Went out to the spot during my break and waved my arms around. Showed up fine on playback, so the feed should have shown him, but it didn't. I even saved a few clips and brought them in the next night, side by side with the times I'd seen the guy. On my phone, he was there, plain as day. On the store's cameras, the space was empty. That freaked me out. I started bringing my phone out and taking pictures through the window when I saw him. A couple were blurry or too dark, but 2 came out okay. I showed them to Mark, and he kind of shrugged and said, "Could be anything. Might just be a shadow." He clearly didn't want to get into it. The last night I saw him was a Thursday. It had snowed a bit earlier in the evening, not much, just a dusting, and by 2:30 the sidewalks were pretty icy. I'd been checking the front window every few minutes out of habit, and sure enough, he was there again. Only this time he was closer, not across the street anymore, but right at the edge of our lot. Still under the light, still not moving. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There weren't any footprints in the snow. I mean, none. The sidewalk between the street and where he stood was untouched. No tracks leading in, no marks behind him, just smooth snow all the way to the curb. I stared for a long time, trying to make sense of it. I opened the door again, leaned out, and shouted a little louder this time. "Hey, you okay?" Same deal, no reaction. I stayed by the door, hand on the lock. My heart was pounding, and I didn't really know why. He hadn't done anything, but the whole thing felt wrong. After about 30 seconds, I shut the door and went to the back office to check the monitors. Nothing. That spot was just empty black and white asphalt on the screen. I ran back to the front, and he was still there. Didn't even look like he'd shifted a centimeter. I took a photo with my phone again, then zoomed in. His face wasn't visible. Shadow from the hat, maybe. But the longer I stared, the more I thought there wasn't a face at all. Just darkness under the brim. Not a shadow, more like nothing. No features, no shine, not even the reflection off skin. I backed away and went into the back room, locked the door, and waited. Didn't tell Mark, I didn't know how to even explain it. I went back to the window around 3:15. He was gone. And that was it. He never showed up again. I kept looking for a while, checked the cameras, checked the lot, even walked across the street once during the day to see if there were any signs someone had been there. Cigarette butts, trash, anything. Nothing. I've still got the photo. It's grainy and dark, and most people I've shown it to just say it's probably a coat rack or something. But I know what I saw.